something that I wanted to talk about that we've talked about in the past briefly. We've touched on it in the show a little bit, and we've spoken about it somewhat on our different social media, but I don't know how much we've actually ever gone in depth about it, is where the show came from. Where did the Alaskan Bush People come from? How did it happen? How did we end up going from a bush family that lived in the middle of nowhere and hardly ever saw anyone to a family that was on the Discovery Channel putting their life out there for millions and millions of people? And it's definitely something that y'all guys have shown interest in hearing about. And so I thought I would talk about that tonight. Now, it all started a very long time ago. And I think the initial catalyst for us going from obscurity into being in the spotlight all started with my dad's books. Now, y'all guys may or may not know that my dad was actually quite a bit of a writer. So my dad, he loved to write. And long story, sort of short, when he was a teenager, he used to be in a band, and his sister and he would write music, words and music for songs for his band. Now, his sister was like a prodigy, played the piano since she was like 2 years old, played all kinds of classical music and did concerts and, actual like classical concerts and all kinds of things. And Dad started a garage band, and he and his sister would write words and music for the band. And he loved to do this. It was something that he had a real passion for. But my dad was orphaned at 16. He lost his mom, dad, and his older sister in a plane crash in Texas. And after that, my dad said that he never even thought about writing anything again. He just put that aside, and it was too painful for him to continue to do that. And it was a part of his life and who he was that he really just stopped. Now, from the time that he was orphaned until he was in his 40s, he never wrote more than a grocery list. But there was one night that we went on a bit of an adventure, and this is actually in my dad's autobiography, One Wave at a Time. So if you want the long version of this story, y'all guys can go check out the book. But my dad, he wanted to write about this night that we had where we went out to move our boat one night because we were living in Haines at this time, and our boat was moored at the cannery side. So there were two docks in Haines. There's the regular dock, and then there's the cannery dock that fishermen use during the fishing season. But in the winter, it blows really hard into that harbor, and it gets really nasty, and nobody keeps their boat over winter there. So we went into town one night to move the boat. It was super late, really stormy, and we were just going to move it around to the other side. It was my dad, myself, and a couple of my siblings. And it was supposed to only take about 2 hours. It takes about an hour and a half to go around. And in bad weather, it can take a little bit longer. But that night took us about 9 hours to move that boat, to go what should have been an hour and a half, 2 hour trip. It was really harrowing, and there was a lot of things that went down that night, and it was not easy to do what we did. And my dad wanted to write about it when, over the next couple of days once we got back. And so he did. He sat down and he wrote about it. And that was the first thing that he had written since he was a teenager. And he said the floodgates just kind of opened after that. And he started just writing all kinds of stuff. He said that it was just there. It was like it was in the air, and he just started picking it out of the air. So Dad, after that point, he started writing like crazy, and he wrote poems and limericks and all kinds of things. And it gradually grew into being longer things. And then there was this one night, Gaby, my little brother, who's always been a really good artist. Even when he was really little, he was very good at drawing. So Gaby, he drew this picture of a beaver, and it wasn't a technical, beaver. The beaver had like overalls and had like tools and stuff. He drew more like a Disney style cartoon character of a beaver, and he wanted Dad to name the beaver. So he goes up to Dad and he's like, Dad, what is this beaver's name? And Dad took one look at this beaver and he goes, that's Edwin T. Flattail. Let me tell you about that beaver. And he went on to tell Gaby all about this beaver's life. On the spot, Dad made up this whole story about the beaver and who he was and how he lived his life and how he built dams and rivers and homes for all the animals and who his friends were and all these things. And when he got through telling the story, I went up to Dad and was like, Dad, you got to write that down. That's too good. You got to write that down. So that was really one of the first children's stories. I guess that was the first children's story that Dad ever wrote. And from that point on, he started writing more and more children's stories. And then the books got longer and longer. And he started writing more adventure novels, like young adult adventure novels and things. Now, fast forward a while, and we started getting really into Dad's books, right? He would write during the day, and then at night he would read us what he had written, and it was very much like episodic, because we would hear the page. We would get to experience the pages that he had written for the story as he was writing it. So we'd write like a few pages during the day and then read them to us at night, like by the campfire. And we got really enthusiastic about them, and we saw real potential in these stories, and we wanted to actually like make something of them. And we tried to draw pictures for him and stuff like that and put them together as actual books, which is not easy to do, and it's definitely not inexpensive. Now, life, of course, was going on and continuing, and we ended up at that time we were living in Haines, and then we ended up moving back onto the boats, and we ended up. I won't go into the whole thing. There's, like I said, it's a long story, but we ended up, after this whole thing that happened, being broken down in Haines, not Haines. We went from Haines back onto the boats, and we got broken down, and we were in Ketchikan. So long story short, we ended up in Ketchikan, and we were broken down. The boat was in pretty bad shape. We needed a lot of parts for the engine. And at this time in Ketchikan, there were not a lot of jobs. There wasn't a lot of things to do. It was really difficult to find any kind of work, doing odd jobs or anything else. We picked up every job that we could find, but like I said, not a lot to do. And we were stuck there for a while. And then tourist season rolled around. Summer came, and it was tourist season. And I had this idea, and we all kind of got the same idea, and we sat around and talked about selling the stories to tourists, because we're like, well, we want to sell the books. We want to make something of them. Why don't we try to sell these to tourists? But we didn't have any in print. We didn't have any way to print them as books. So I actually got the idea, what if we recorded them? What if we had to record the stories? Because when we were kids, it was a long time ago, I'm probably showing my age here, but we had little cassette tapes that you would plug in, and the cassette tape would read the story, and it would have a little ding when you're supposed to turn the page. And so that was kind of the catalyst for the idea for getting Dad to read the stories into audiobooks. For the children's stories is what they were. Now, audiobooks were not prevalent the way that they are now. They were not something we were incredibly familiar with. So that's why the idea kind of came from those old cassette tapes that you would plug in that would tell the story to you, and you would have the storybook in front of you, and it would ding at the end of the page, and you would flip the page to the next one, and it would keep reading it, for like Jack and the Beanstalk and stuff like that. So we found this guy that worked at a church, and I forget exactly everything he did with the church, but he was a big volunteer in town, did a lot of like volunteer work. And one of the things he had done was he built a little recording studio in his house. It was like basically built into a closet. He had a closet that he built a little recording studio so that he could record music for the church. So the church had like a little musical group, their choir, and he would record their music. So he agreed to let Dad, for free, for nothing, just as a good deed, go in and spend all day recording, and record as many books as he could in a day. Now, the guy said he didn't really have any ability to edit anything. He was just able to record it and then give us the main copy of the recording. So Dad went in and he recorded several of the stories, several of the kids' books onto into audio. And we were given the audio file. Now, from that, we then had to figure out how to turn that into an audiobook we could sell. And so I went and found another person who had a computer that they let me borrow. They didn't actually let me borrow the computer. They worked nights, and they said that while they were at work, I could be at their house burning the discs. So I figured out how to, took what little money we had and bought up a bunch of blank CDs and went to this person's house, and they showed me how to do it. They were like, this is how you burn a CD. I put in the file for it, and they showed me how to do it. And I would sit there all night long burning all these CDs because it was time consuming. And then we took that and we figured out how to make like a cover for it and all those things. And I'll fast forward a little bit. We got it all put together. And then we went around town trying to figure out how to sell these things to somebody. It turns out like you're not able to just, sell them to people. That's frowned upon. So we had to figure out somewhere that we could sit and sell them. And once we did that, long story short, we went around all over town, tried to talk everyone into letting us set up like a little table and offered to give them like a percentage of our sales or something like that. We ended up meeting a guy named Dave Coates. Now, Dave Coates was a true professional, a real entrepreneur, and he was somebody that really cared about the entrepreneurial spirit. Like he believed in it, right? So when he saw how into it we were and everything that we were putting into what we were doing and the enthusiasm we had for it, it was just this crazy group of kids with their wild hair, fresh from the bush, with this crazy idea of selling these audiobooks. He was like, no, I'll help you out. I'll give you a little spot out front of one of my places. You can put up a card table and keep whatever you sell. You don't have to pay me. Just do your thing. That he appreciated the spirit we had and to just go for it. And so we did. And people really loved the stories. Like we had a lot of really positive response about the stories. Now you weren't allowed to like grab people and tell them about the stories or like yell at them, hey, come check out my stories, or anything like that. So what we came up with was that we had a little boom box that we could play the stories because that was fair. You could play music or whatever. So we would just have one of the CDs playing. So as people would walk by, they would hear our dad's voice reading the story aloud, and they would get curious and they would come over and we'd tell them about it, and they would buy a CD. And we sold a lot of them to quite a few people. And people would keep asking though about our life. Like one of the main things people wanted to know is like, who are you? Where do you come from? What's going on with this? And as we told them about our life and how we lived, there was always this like sparkle in their eyes when they would hear about it, because a lot of people in the tourist industry in Alaska, like they're genuine Alaskans. They carve their own things. They put their stamp on it. They forge their own knives. It's very real, right? Everything that you get up there is very real. But then there are a lot of places that these things are just made in China, right? It's a bunch of the same thing over and over. Because there are a lot of shops that they set up that like big conglomerates and things set up in all these different places where the cruise ships stop. So it's all the same things. They just mass produce stuff that is for Alaska or for the Bahamas or for wherever, and then they sell it at these different ports. But if you turn it over, it all says made in China. So we were very authentic. We were another one of those Alaskan authentic salesmen that were selling something that was really Alaskan and was really made by an Alaskan and was made by an Alaskan family. And people really showed a lot of interest in that because of what we were doing. And I noticed this look in people's eyes that they had. And they would always be like, that's such a great story when we would tell them about our dad and our family and how we lived. So I got the idea. I was like, Dad, you should write a story about your life. You should write this story that we keep telling people, because people, they love the children's stories, but they seem to really like our story. And I think that your life story would be a good story to tell, because also Dad always told us stories about his adventures when he was a kid. He told us about how he grew up and the things that he did and all these adventures that he had and all these adventures that he and Mom had in Alaska. So we had grown up hearing all these adventures and living our own, right? So since we lived the adventures so much, it wasn't that crazy hearing Mom's and Dad's adventures. But then having that outside perspective of all these tourists and people that responded the way they did to all of the stories and the way we were, was like, Dad, you got to write this. It took me over a year to convince Dad to finally sit down and write his story. Because as much as Dad enjoyed enjoyed talking about himself, not in like a grandiose, egocentric way. He liked to tell a good story, and he loved to sit down and hear other people's stories. And he always said, everybody has a cool story. Everybody's got a story to them, and he loved to hear about people's stories and tell his. And Dad could talk with somebody forever about their life and about his life, but he didn't like to brag, and he felt that some of the things in his life, some of the things that he would be writing about came across like he was bragging. And then there were some things that it was hard for him to write about. When you've been through everything that my dad had been through and being orphaned and all the hard times in his life, it's a difficult thing to sit down and wrap your mind up in for as long as it takes to write it into a book and to try and write it well. And Dad always said, I'm not a writer, I'm just a storyteller. He didn't sit down and try to write something that Hemingway would write. What he ended up doing when I finally convinced him to actually sit down and try to write his autobiography, what he ended up doing was just telling his story. So his book is very much written in the same way that he would sit down and tell you the story. So like if you read One Wave at a Time, my dad's autobiography, it's written as if he's in the room just telling you the story, right? He wasn't trying to be Hemingway. He wasn't trying to make it a New York Times bestseller. My dad had no formal training with writing. He just wrote what he felt. And so that's one thing that makes the story very authentic. Now, when he first came back with a draft for the book, he's like, okay, I did it. And it took him a while. And he's like, okay, I did it. And he handed it to me. And it was like 40, 50, 60 pages worth, 75 at most. It was like a pamphlet, not a book. I was like, Dad, this is not an autobiography. Great, wonderful, awesome that you're finally doing it, but go back and write an actual book. Like, go back and write your story. I want you to get more in depth. I want you to actually feel it and talk about it. And I think what really broke it into something that Dad embraced was that I told him, just sit down and write out like you're telling someone the story, the same way as if somebody was sitting there with you and you're telling them the story. And so he went back, and that time he wrote the real story. He wrote his full autobiography, which was still shorter than it should be because he definitely left stuff out, and he should have written something that was like 10,000 pages. Instead, it ended up being a little over 200. But it's a really good story, and it's an honest account of his life and Mom's and Dad's life together in Alaska, and how they lived their life and their adventures. And so I was like, okay, perfect, awesome, wonderful. So we took that, and Mom did a lot of editing on it, and I typed it up at the library. So Dad wrote it by hand. He always wrote everything by hand, a pencil and a piece of paper. He didn't even like an ink pen. And he definitely didn't like to type, and we had no real access to computers or anything like that. We didn't own a laptop, any of this stuff. So Dad wrote it with just a pencil and a stack of paper. And then Mom took that and she wrote it, edited it, but she did it by hand. So then she just wrote it on a piece of paper. So she did use a pen. And then they gave that to me. Mom gave me what she wrote from what Dad wrote. What she edited by hand, and I took that to the libraries and typed it. Now, I am definitely not a typist, and I've gotten better now definitely better than I used to be, because at that time I was horrible. Like, I was really bad. It took me a long time of going up to the library and sitting there typing with two fingers, trying to type this thing out, and then printing it a little bit at a time at the library for free, and bringing that back so that Mom could then go through and edit that and mark everywhere I had made a mistake, and then I could go back and refix that. And so this went on for a while. I'd be embarrassed to say exactly how long it took me to do this, but finally I was able to put it together, typed, edited, a full draft of the book of One Wave at a Time, of my dad's autobiography. And the night that I came home with that from the library, I will never forget how excited everyone was, how excited the whole family was, because it had just become real. It was one thing when we had the idea. It was one thing when Dad sat down and actually wrote the book. It was one thing when Mom edited the book and wrote it out by hand, the edited version, and gave it to me. And it was one thing when I was going to the library every day and trying to type this thing out. It was a completely different thing that night when I brought home that typed manuscript and I set it down and was like, here's the book. And I did it professionally. I have no idea how I managed to do it. Still don't know. Like, it's difficult for me to do everything I'm doing now for the publishing company, let alone then. And I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to do any of it. I would look up things of like how to adjust margins and this and that and try and make it work. And somehow, through the grace of the good Lord, I managed to make it work. And I was so proud when I set that manuscript down in front of everybody. I was like, here's the book. Here's One Wave at a Time. There was like a standing ovation. Like, everybody was like, just so happy and so thrilled. And Dad was just beaming, and everybody was slapping down the back like, you did it. You wrote your book. You wrote your autobiography. This is awesome and amazing. And that night, Dad sat down, and he had already read the story to us, of course, after he first finished it. But that night, he sat down and read the finished, edited, typed out version. And it was really cool. It was just really cool, and something that I will never forget, because that was a real turning point for our family and for our family company and for everything we were trying to do. Now that brings me to the next chapter of this story, because from there we decided that it was time to try and create something beyond what we had already done with the books and to pursue turning Dad's autobiography into a real book. Now at that time, we had our little company that we were running, our little publishing company, to produce Dad's children's stories just in the audiobooks. And then the few copies of One Wave we were able to actually put together, which were basically just manuscripts at that time. And we wanted to take these and see if we could find a way to turn them into real books. And we knew that that wasn't something we could really do in Alaska. And we had saved up a lot of money, not a lot of money. For us, it was a lot. And so we had saved up a pretty good amount, and we made our way down to the lower 48. And this was the first time that we had really ever left Alaska. The first time that some of us had ever been out of Alaska. Because the only time I had been out of Alaska, I was really little, because my little brother Gaby was actually born in Texas. And at that time, my dad's great-grandma, my dad's grandma, was still alive. And he wanted her to be around when Gaby was born. And it meant something for Gaby to be born in Texas. And so we went down when I was a little guy. I was like 5 years old, for Gaby to be born, and then came back to Alaska. And that was the only time we had left. So most of the family had never even been out of Alaska. So we went down to the lower 48 with Dad's books, the audio stories, and the One Wave at a Time book, and a wing and a prayer, right, to try and make this real, to make it work, to figure out what we needed to do to make it work. And we didn't know if we were looking for a person or a thing or a place or a business or what, but we thought it was worth it and thought it was worth a try. So we went down south, and we went all over the place here and there with the books, sold quite a few of the audiobooks of the children's stories to people here and there, at mom and pop stores mostly. Like, we would stop and tell them our story and what we were doing, and they would buy some of the audiobooks, and we would get enough fuel to keep on going down the road. And we did that for a little while, and I got the idea about doing like speaking engagements. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself there, because we ended up finding a place where we could print the book. There was a person that helped us take what I had done and the file and actually print copies of the book. And they did it relatively cheap. It wasn't free, but they did it relatively cheap, and they let us kind of charge it up and then pay it off as we went. They're like, just send me the money to cover what I print for you, and I'll give you like 100 books. And so at that point, we were completely ecstatic that we had that and that we had made it to that point. Because that night, I also remember, was super cool, because then it went from being just a manuscript to being a real book. And that was the point at which we had a real copy of the book. We had an actual sit down with a cover and a spine and a back. And it even had a barcode because the guy was like a professional printer. And so he got us a barcode and everything. Now, remember, he charged us for the stuff, but he definitely did not charge the price that it actually was. Like, the guy really helped us out, and he let us charge it and pay it off later, or pay it as we go. And so then the question was like, well, how do we sell these? Where do we go? And at that time, we were staying in Nashville, Tennessee, sort in that area. And I had the idea, I was like, okay, well, we need to sell these to someone. And I forget exactly what happened. I think it was actually like one of those things like on a movie, because I was in a filling station or something and I saw a newspaper. And on this newspaper, it said something about a Rotary Club and a service club, and that they were looking for speakers. And I was like, okay, Dak can talk. They're looking for speakers. I was like, I wonder if they would let us sell the book at their club. So I bought the newspaper, I tore out the part with the number, and I went to a payphone, actually, back then, which for anyone listening that doesn't know what a payphone is, they used to have like booths with phones in them, and you would pump quarters into it to make a phone call, right? Long before we ever had a cell phone. And so I went to a payphone, punched the numbers in, and talked to the person that answered about the Rotary Club. And I was like, so you're looking for a speaker for your Rotary Club? Well, do I have the speaker for you? And I went on to tell him about my dad, and that he was a real bush Alaskan, and we were down here on a book tour, and he would love to come talk about his life of adventures in Alaska and his autobiography, One Wave at a Time. And everyone I talked to about, they were really, really excited. Like the first lady, super excited. She was like, well, we love Alaska. Would love to have that. Our last speaker was actually really boring, and this sounds exciting. And I was like, well, can I sell the book there? And she was like, of course, of course. You get 15 minutes for your dad to talk while everybody's having their lunch in the middle of the meeting. And you can tell them that you have the books for sale. And then if anybody that wants to buy one at the end of the meeting, they can come over to y'all guys and buy a book. And so, again, when I got home and told everybody this, I was very proud of myself. Like, I was really proud, really happy that I figured it out, made it work. I didn't really tell anybody what I was doing until I had already kind of set it up. And then I was like, Dad, how would you like to go speak at a Rotary Club? So that started our speaking engagements. And from there, it just kind of snowballed, because I was like, well, okay, how many service clubs are there? Because that was a Rotary Club. And I was like, okay, well, there are more service clubs. So then I found a directory that had like all these different service clubs, Kiwanis clubs, Lions clubs, all these things, which are actually really cool groups of people who do a lot of work with like their communities and a lot of volunteer work. And it's primarily made up of a bunch of like business owners and things from the community that go to these clubs and figure out how they can all donate their money to the same place, and what they can volunteer for to help build up their communities. And I think that's really cool. And it was cool for us to be able to be, part of those things, and to bring the meetings up a little bit and make it more lively and give everybody a little bit of entertainment and whatnot while they were at the meetings. And we met a lot of cool people, a lot of really nice people, and a lot of people were very enthusiastic about the book and just loved it. I actually recently found because we didn't have cameras or really any way to record anything back then, but I found recently a file on one of my old computers that we spoke at one Rotary Club, and it was filmed. It was a really big Rotary Club. A lot of them were like smaller places, but this one was super big. This was like a really gigantic Rotary Club, and people from all over the place came to this club. It was a meeting of other clubs is what it was. So where there were the little Rotary clubs, and then they had a big meeting where all of the different Rotary clubs came together, and that's what this was. And because we had spoken to so many Rotary clubs, Dad got invited as the guest speaker for this thing, which was a big deal. Definitely a big deal for us. And it was filmed. Anyway, they filmed the meeting. And so Dad, his presentation was filmed. And at the end of that, the lady came up to me and gave me a copy of the recording, which I thought was super cool. And I kept that with me. And then, many years later, ended up with a laptop and a computer where I could actually record it and play it. And I thought that had been lost. And I very recently, like in the last few weeks, found that footage. Very emotional to find that at this point in my life, so many years later. And, Dad having passed, and to watch that, very emotional. Took me right back to those times. But anyway, back to the story. So we did this for a while, and we also we did some volunteer stuff. Like there was one place, it was a blind school. It was a school for blind children. And Dad went back there probably like 20 times reading to those kids and just reading his children's stories to them. And made friends with a lot of the little guys, because something Dad really wanted to do, something he talked about doing the whole time, was going into hospitals and reading to like sick kids and stuff like that. And there were a lot of legalities to being able to do those things, and we were really nobody. We had no status, no money, no sway with anyone, so it's not like Dad was a celebrity wanting to do those things. So the hospitals really shot us down, and they got us with a lot of red tape. I ended up meeting and talking to a lot of really nice doctors and people that worked like in the hospitals that would have loved to have done it. But then the people that actually like made up the rules and like owned the hospitals and things really stopped us and put up a wall where we couldn't do that. But it wasn't the same with the blind school. Dad could go in there and read to him as many times as he wanted to. And so we actually hung around in this one area way longer than we had planned, just because Dad kept going back to that blind school and wanting to read to those kids. And that's admirable. I thought it was really cool that Dad was that type guy, because it's something that meant a lot to Dad. We also went to a lot of churches and did a lot of speaking at churches and things like that. And most of the churches, Dad wanted to just go in and do his thing without selling the book. He's like, we should just give them copies. I was always the guy that was like, nope, I'm not running a charity here. For the blind school, that's cool for people like that. But no, everywhere else, I'm selling the book. So the churches were cool with it, though, because they wanted to buy the book. Also, they were all like, no, we want to buy the book. Let us buy the book. Let us help y'all guys out. You're a cool family. You're a Christian family. You're doing something we all believe in. We think it's great, the values that your stories have and that your autobiography has. So y'all guys keep doing your thing. We want to buy some books. And we ended up not only paying off the 100 books that we had gotten, but ordering quite a few more in that time. And then time passed, and it was time to go back to Alaska. And so we made our way back to Alaska. And I got the idea, because there just weren't enough people to sell stuff to in Alaska, and tourist season is only so long. So I was like, okay, I had more experience now with the internet, from going to libraries and things and working on the internet and finding the service clubs and things on the internet. And I was like, okay, we need a website. I need to start a website. That's how we need to sell the book. It took me probably a year to start the first website, to figure it out and to get it going. And at this point in my life, here in modern day, I've probably started 20 different websites, because for one reason or another, they just didn't work out. They got shut down, or I wasn't able to keep it running, or I ran out of funds, or whatever happened. I've probably started 20 different websites before having the one that I have now, which I'm hoping is the one that sticks. This is the one that's going to really make it this time. But anyway, back then I started several, and just kept starting them and kept doing it, kept trying to learn, and how do I make it work, and how do I build this, and how do I make it all go together. And at this time, we had always messed around with having cameras every now and then. Like, my dad loved cameras. I grew up doing photography. I was 6 years old when my dad gave me my first camera, old 35 millimeter Canon film camera. Was super cool. I had that thing for a very long time. And my dad bought one of the first like camcorders that you could buy way back, recorded on tapes, and we loved those kinds of things. So with some of the money we had made from the books and whatnot, and with some of our savings, we bought an old camcorder, which was a really good camcorder, actually. Like, this one wasn't like our old, like, terrible cruddy camcorders. This one was really good quality, because we wanted to film good stuff right? And we, at this time, I had discovered YouTube long ago, long before it is like it is now. When I first discovered YouTube, I was one of the first, like, I think 1,000 people to sign up for it or something like that, or first 2,000 people. It's something crazy like that. And back then, you didn't need an email address. There were no ads. There was no nothing. It was just the Wild West of internet, right? You could put up anything you wanted to, any length of video. It was owned by like a private company, and they didn't care what you did. So it was long before like Google or anybody bought it. And we would film videos and put it on YouTube. And we filmed some of our hunts and things like that. So we would go hunting. And I've always been a movie buff. All of us have. We always loved movies and stuff. So we filmed our hunts like it was a movie. And we loved like Travel Channel shows and things like that, like guys that would go down and sail the Bahamas and all those things. So we filmed our hunts as if it was a movie or a Travel Channel show. And this dude saw some of our YouTube videos. What was his name? I cannot remember his name. It'll come to me later. But his website was called myoutdoortv.com. And he was like, guys, I love what you're doing. I would love to put some of these videos on myoutdoortv.com, my website. And we found out later this guy was sort of a big deal, that he like was one of the co-founders of CMT, the country music television, the MTV of country music, CMT. And he had started the website, myoutdoortv.com, and we were like, okay, cool, sounds neat. So we sent him some of our videos and he put them up there, and it was pretty cool. And like, I think we did really well making the videos. I wish that I had that footage. It exists somewhere. So I really so much wish I could find all that footage, because it was really good and it would be awesome to have. And a little thing here, some of the footage we filmed, some of the things we shot, and some of the stuff that I actually directed and put together made it into several of our first episodes that aired on the Discovery Channel, which I thought was cool. So anyway, back to the story. I digress. At this point, we were running our little YouTube stuff. I had the website going, and we were putting videos out on myoutdoortv.com. And we didn't know this at the time, but apparently the Discovery Channel and a bunch of other channels were starting up a lot of their Alaskan reality shows. And now, back then, reality shows weren't the same as they are now. It wasn't. They weren't as prevalent and things as they are now. Now it's a total genre. Back then, it was a different kind of thing. As much as there were a lot of them, it wasn't how it is now. It wasn't like a set thing. And so they were looking for authentic bush families to make Alaskan reality shows from, right? Now, when I would check the emails for the website, mostly it was like people that wrote in that really enjoyed my dad's books, or they loved our YouTube stuff, or they really enjoyed myoutdoortv.com. It was, it's the people from Australia and things, or just all kinds of people that would write in that liked our story and enjoyed what we were doing. And I started getting these emails mixed in there of people that were saying that they worked for production companies and wanted to like film something with us, and that they thought they could maybe sell it to a television network and that we could start a TV show. Now, of course, I thought that this was just a scam, right? I mean, obviously it's a scam, right? I mean, I had gotten, scam emails before, and I wasn't an idiot. I wasn't a dunce. I knew, scam emails, so I just deleted them. I was like, this isn't legit. It's a scam. I probably deleted 20 or 30 of those emails of people being like, I'm with such and such production company, would love to film something with your family. The Discovery Channel's looking for something, or National Geographic's looking for something, and all these different company names and television names. And, who hadn't heard of the Discovery Channel or National Geographic, right? So I was like, there's no way. This isn't legit. And it was always from like email addresses for like these production companies you had never heard of. So I was like, nah, this isn't real. It's a scam. They just kept coming though. I just kept getting them. There were so many of them. And like I said, I think I deleted like 25, 30 of these emails. Definitely more than 20. And then one day I was just like, okay, let's take this to Dad and see what he says. So I printed one of them out at the library and I took the email to Dad and showed it to him. And he was like, okay, this is kind of interesting. Oh, and you've gotten 30 of these? I was like, yeah, I've gotten quite a few of them. I've just been deleting them. This is a scam, right? And Dad was like, well, I don't know. Maybe we should call the phone number and find out. And so we called the phone number. And it was a production company that was like, no, this is real. This is not a scam. I'm not asking you for money. What I would like to do is to fly a film crew out to wherever y'all guys are and sit down and do some interviews with your family and talk to y'all guys and just hear about your lives. And I'm going to take that footage to the people that I know over here at the Discovery Corporation who are looking for authentic bush families to start reality shows with. And at that time, I think they had a few families that they were potentially thinking about or had gotten in contact with. We later found out that most of those didn't pan out because they were families that didn't live in the bush full time. And we did. So they were very enthusiastic about wanting us. Also, we're a big family. We're all kind of crazy. You know, we don't fit into the normal mold of like what you expect when you're dealing with even bush people. And so, you know, fast forward a little while later, they sent a film crew out and we sat down and we did interviews and they asked us what an iPhone was, which at that time, didn't know it was just a cell phone. I knew what a cell phone was. You know, we didn't have one. I had never owned one. I don't think I had ever used one. No, I had used one because a lady let me borrow her cell phone to make some phone calls once when I was calling some of those Rotary clubs. So I had used a cell phone, had never owned one, and definitely didn't know that an iPhone was just a brand of cell phone. I didn't know what an iPhone was. None of us did. Definitely had never heard of a lot of the like people they were talking about because they did like a pop culture quiz thing. And, you know, when you start talking about like modern pop stars, even now, I don't know who you're talking about. I have no idea. I know who Def Leppard is. I know who Stevie Ray Vaughan is. I know who Axl Rose is. I have no idea about modern pop singers. So they then took that footage of us sitting down for interviews and then doing some like, you know, promo shots of the family and whatnot back to the Discovery Channel and almost immediately got a green light. They almost immediately, Discovery was like, no, let's film some episodes with these people. Love it, love it, love it. So it was probably not even like a month later, I think, they were like, okay, we want to film with y'all guys. What are your plans for the future? And at this time, my family was, I wasn't one that was very enthusiastic about this plan. I love the boats. I grew up on boats. Like my earliest memories are on boats. I love the ocean. The land doesn't move right. But a lot of my family wanted to move further inland and they wanted to try moving up further up north. It was near, I believe it was the Copper River area was where we were moving. And much like when I was a kid and we moved off Gypsy Girl when I was a little guy, just Gypsy was the first boat we lived on when I was a little kid. And I was about 9 years old when we moved off Gypsy and moved up to Haynes. And I emphatically did not want to do that. I really hated it. It's you know, it's like when I guess it's an experience a lot of people have as kids where their parents move and they move to a new town and you lose all your friends and you lose the home that you love. And for me, it was different, but the same, because that home I loved was that boat. It was Gypsy. And my friends were was the ocean and the wolves and the sea. And I hated it. I hated moving off that boat and moving up to Haynes. But that is a story for another time. So back onto this story. So the production companies asked what we wanted to do and where we were going. And my family wanted to move up further up north and get some property up there. So the production company said, okay, we'd love to follow y'all guys and just film what you're doing. And so, you know, we went up north and we did what we do, you know, which what we do is we just show up wherever we are and we build what we need to survive and we gather what we need to live. And so that's what we did. And that's what we did on the show. And that ended up being the first half of the first season of Alaskan Bush People is what it was. Because the first season of Alaskan Bush People got broken up into two halves. So the first half was up north with us building on our property there and setting up shop. And then the second part of the first season, the second half of the first season, was in Ketchikan, and then later on Chichikov Island, which was where we moved up to Browntown. And so that was the second half of the first season, because once we went up towards, Copper River and that area and everything, it was as terrible as I thought it was going to be, and everybody was ready to move back towards the ocean and be back on the boats and back on the water, which I was very enthusiastic about, and definitely voted let's do that, because like I said, I love the ocean and I love being on boats. But at the close of the first season, the first half of the first season, we stopped filming, and we had pretty much decided at that point, we're pulling the plug on this. Let's move back to Southeast Alaska. It's terrible up here. Great for the people that love it here, but not for us. Southeast is where we're going. It was months before we heard from anyone. Like they left, and we didn't hear from anybody. No phone calls, nothing. Couldn't get a hold of anybody. And enough time passed that we were like, well, I guess the show's not a thing. I guess they didn't want it. Let's just go on with our life. So, a few months passed, and we were in Ketchikan, planning our big push to get back to Southeast and find property up there. And at that time, I think we were looking at possibly moving to Kodiak, looking at property in Kodiak. I think it was between Kodiak, somewhere on the back end of Prince of Wales, which just wasn't far enough in the bush for us. And then there was the property at Chichikov. And we pretty much settled on the Chichikov property, and we were saving up money and working odd jobs and selling books and doing everything that we could to get up there when we finally got contacted back by the production company and the Discovery Corporation. And what had happened was that they loved it so much that they wanted to hold it for the next run of shows. They didn't want to just put it out immediately. And at first we were actually going to air on Animal Planet, not the Discovery Channel. But the Discovery Corporation loved our show so much and loved the family so much. They're like, no, we want to hold on to this and put it out with the next run of new shows that we're doing the following year. And we want this to be a front runner show for our Alaskan shows on the Discovery Channel the following year. So when they contacted us about continuing to do the show, we were saving up for a piece of property and working odd jobs and all kinds of stuff. So we're like, sure, let's do it. You're going to just film us doing our thing like last time. And they're like, yeah, that's what we're going to do. And so we're like, cool, let's do it. And they showed up, and we kept filming the show. And the rest, as they say, is history. So that's really how the show came about. That's how Alaskan Bush People started. That is the story. Pretty much, I'm cutting some corners here and there on the story. I had to condense it down a little bit, but that is the somewhat long-ish short version of how Alaskan Bush People came about and what started the show. So I guess in a nutshell, it boils down to my dad's autobiography, the websites we were running, and the videos and things we were filming for myoutdoortv.com and YouTube and whatnot, was really the catalyst for everything. And then those 30-something emails that I deleted, threw away, and thought were a scam. But we took a chance on it. It wasn't a scam. It was real. It was legit. And we became a very well-known and somewhat universally loved show, Alaskan Bush People. And if y'all guys are listening to this and you've never seen the show, you should definitely go check it out. If you like Alaskan shows, if you're all about family and faith and freedom the way that we are, if you want to check something like that out, if you enjoy those kinds of things, I definitely say give it a go. And if you're somebody that already knows the show, if y'all guys are someone that has enjoyed the show, or that you've been with us from the beginning, or if you just found it and are enjoying it, I want to say thank you very much for being fans of the show and honorary members of the Wolfpack, because this has been a good journey. It has been a lot of fun. There's definitely been way more good come from being on the show than any bad. It's been quite the adventure. It's an adventure that I feel very fortunate to have been a part of. It's super cool that our show lives on and is something that I don't think has ever stopped airing since it first started airing. And so many people love it and they're so enthusiastic about it. And we grew up watching Discovery Channel documentaries about cheetahs and stuff. So it's pretty cool that our family became one of those documentaries about the wild animals, but we are the wild animals that it was documenting. So I just think that's super cool. I think it's really cool to be part of that, to be part of that kind of history, and that we got to do it as a family, and that we had those experiences and all those adventures, and that all of y'all got to share those adventures with us. I thought I would talk a little bit about what it was like when we first started filming the reality show Alaskan Bush People. Now, as y'all guys already probably know, we used to film some of our hunts and outdoor survival tips and things like that, and we used to put it on a website called myoutdoortv.com. We originally started doing it on YouTube, and then we were picked up to do it on to put our videos on myoutdoortv.com, and people loved them, and it kind of took off. And that's actually how the Discovery Channel and a lot of the production companies that sought us out actually discovered us. That and the website that I was hosting for my dad's book, One Wave at a Time. And we grew up with, who didn't have a camcorder, right? Even way back the way we grew up, we had a camcorder a lot of the time, and we would record, our little adventures and stuff and do home movies and whatnot. I mean, who hasn't done that? Who didn't grow up with that kind of things? And nowadays, everybody's got like a camera in their pocket. Everybody can like record stuff and are always like filming things. But it's very different, the home movie kind of filming versus trying to film and successfully filming, professional hunts and things like that. But it's also very different to go from that to an actual production like a reality show. One of the key differences is like it's very different when you're in charge of what you're doing constantly and you decide when the cameras are on or off, right? So when I was directing like our hunts and our survival videos and things like that, it was very much like, okay, we're filming now, we're not filming now, okay, back to filming. When you're doing a reality show like ours, when you're doing a show that is all about documenting your life, basically the cameras are on all the time. Basically, they are just constantly rolling. Really, the only time the cameras weren't on was when they were changing the batteries or they were taking lunch. And a lot of the times taking lunch, they still left a lot of the cameras like the GoPros and things rolling. So it was really just when they were changing the batteries that we weren't being filmed if the sun was up, and sometimes even at night. So it's different in that aspect, and the amount of filming and the amount of angles and things that you're being hit with, and the constantly wearing a microphone and all those things that go into it. Because our show very much was just them filming our life. It was very much just them hanging out with us with cameras, filming whatever we were doing. And I'll never forget like that first day that we ever filmed. So we had done the preliminary like little sit down interview kind of thing, talking about ourselves, answering some questions, and we did a little bit of like filming around for like the test shoot, but that was drastically different than the actual filming once that started. So like the first day of actually filming, we all met in this area before we started driving out to where we were going to look at our new property up near the Copper River area and whatnot. And I remember it was kind of weird because it was like space aliens had landed, because there were all these people. There were producers and camera people and sound, audio guys, and there were technicians. And I remember we all got in line to get mic'd up because, they had one or two mic sound people that were gearing you up with all the microphones and doing mic checks and all that stuff. So we all got in line, and one at a time, we got our mics put on. And while they were doing that, while they were putting the mics on us, there was the person, I can't remember what they're called. It's an AC or something like that, that just hooks up like the GoPros and makes sure batteries are in all the cameras and everything's in working order and all that. Because it's not the actual like camera people that run the GoPros. It's a different technician that sets up the GoPros and whatnot. Now, the director of photography is the person that decides which angle the GoPros are going to have, and they will adjust that and where it's going to shoot and what it's going to catch. But the person that just sets them up is a different person, a technician. And that person was over there putting, I think, 6 or 7 GoPros in our car. Now, if you don't know, a GoPro is just a small camera, is what it is, that they can hook up to get angles and shots that you couldn't get with a normal camera. And it gives them the ability to like stick them in odd places, right? So like with our car, when they were gearing that up, these GoPros have different mounts, and some of them can stick like right on the windshield. So I remember they had a GoPro on the just under the rear view mirror. They had one in like the top left corner of the car shooting at, like they were cross shooting it. So there was one up above on the left of the driver's side, and there was one on the passenger side, and they shot across. So the passenger side camera is filming dad driving, and then the driver's side camera is filming mom on the passenger side. And then they had the one under the rear view shooting like the whole car, and they had a couple behind us that were shooting that direction so that they got like that angle of everybody from the back. And then they had a couple like in the mid area of the car that were filming all of us and like cross shooting us. And so it's a little weird. And a big thing to it is just the amount that they're rolling. It's the amount that they're filming, because I don't know if that's something that most people realize, just the amount of time that these cameras are on, how long they're actually filming. It's a real test in how long can you sit up straight and look like you have perfect posture before you just go right back into having terrible posture, which for me was about a minute and a half. And I remember some of us were a little bit more enthusiastic about the filming. Some of us were a little more hesitant. Like I remember Bear, very into it. Bear was super enthusiastic about filming. I think he was really looking forward to it. Like Bear was like, oh yeah, people are going to film me all the time. I'm going to do some cool stuff. Gaby was into it and wanted to do the show. He thought it was cool, but he's kind of shy. Like you wouldn't guess it with Gaby, but he's a little bit shy. He's a little reserved. But the thing is with Gaby is, much like Mom, he'll start off shy, but then he just kind of rolls right into it. And Gaby has a habit of getting used to like cameras rolling and just going with it and kind of forgetting they're there. And that's how Gaby is. And the rest of us were just, somewhere in between those two, I think. Somewhere in between the crazy enthusiasm and the apprehensive, I'm not sure if I can be myself with cameras rolling. But I think we all kind of fell into it pretty quickly. But it was very, very different. Like it was different to just have that, also that lack of control of when the cameras are filming or they're not, because they were just always filming. And so the GoPros were interesting. And then there's the fact that like everything you're saying is being recorded as well. It's not like it's on sometimes when you're talking. It's all the time. It's all the time. It's every word that you say is being recorded. The mics were always on. So you're always being recorded. Like everything you say, basically everything that you do. Even when they were changing the cameras on the batteries, the mics were still rolling. And the only time those were off was when they had to change the batteries on the mics. So it's a weird experience to get used to. And the strange thing also is how quickly you do kind of get used to it. For as how weird as it was, we got used to it really fast. For how weird it was, we got used to it very quickly into just being yourself and doing what you're doing. But also, I think one of the things that helped with that for us was the fact that we didn't really have a choice but to just do what we were doing, because there were things we had to do. There was stuff we had to get done. There were objectives that we needed to do to complete the mission. So we had to do what we were doing. So the cameras being there just kind of became an afterthought. Just kind of became a bit of an afterthought. Now, one of the interesting things too, though, was dealing with people not from that world. And it was a real mix of people that we got on the show at first and also later in the later seasons and on Chichikov Island, because you would get some people who were adventurers, total adventurers. It's what they did. They traveled around. They went to all these crazy places, some of them really dangerous, so they were kind of used to it, and they were just gung-ho about, going for it and making it work, and they were in for the adventure. Well, you had some other people, because this is like primarily, people were from all over, but it's primarily like from Los Angeles, New York, those kinds of people. And the ones that weren't diehard adventurers, I think, had a little bit of a misconception of what it was going to be like to film and work on our show. Some people didn't last very long. Some people showed up and they were just gone like the next day. Like they just were like, nope, not what I signed up for. I don't know what they thought they were signing up for, but they just didn't. They didn't last long. Other people stuck around because they loved it and they enjoyed the adventure and the beauty of Alaska, and that was interesting. And it was different being around people from those worlds in one way, but in another way it was really just like our normal life, because growing up the way that we did, we weren't around a lot of people, but when we were, it was always people like from all over the place, right? Like not a lot of people that you're around in Alaska are actually like from Alaska. Like most of the people are from somewhere else. However, most of those people have chosen to make Alaska their life, unless you're talking to like tourists. And that's kind of how some of the camera people were, and some of the film crew and some of the producers and whatnot, because it was a little bit like tourists were following you around trying to keep up. And let's just say it's a good thing that they hired safety people to try to keep an eye on their crew people, because some of them did not know how to keep an eye on themselves. Some great adventurers, they would do fine in Alaska in the bush. Others, not so much. Now, that's one thing. Later on, there was a big commute for people to get to where we were. So the first season, not so much. They kind of had like a base camp pretty close to where we were trying to build that house. Or well, we did actually build that house to a point up in Copper River. We got it to where it was basically built, and we were going to start working on the inside before we decided, this just isn't for us. Let's move back to Southeast. And then once we were there, when we were on Chichikov, the crew stayed in Hoona, right? So the crew would stay in Hoona, and then they would take a boat. They had hired a boat that would take them from Hoona to us, because the only two ways to get to where our property was, even though it is on Chichikov Island, there are no roads or anything that connected where we were to Hoona. So the only way to get from Hoona to where we were was like a 40-50 minute boat ride from town, or take a float plane. And so the boat ride is what they opted for. One, for price; two, because there aren't really like stationed float planes in Hoona, and that would have been a fiasco if they were trying to float plane every day to where we were. So they set up to boat from Hoona to our area, and it was a 40-minute boat ride every day. And they had to leave like super early, because they would show up at our door really early, like sunup is when we would start filming most days. They would usually show up when like the sun was just coming up, so they had to leave like super early. And I can remember because we would do interviews in town. So they had an interview thing set up like in town that we would have to go to do interviews, so that they could spend like the whole day filming the interviews. Later on, we had we built like an interview set thing on the island over where we were, so we didn't have to commute back and forth. But for a while, like at first, we had to take our boat into town or ride on their crew boat into town, which was a little bit easier and more economical with the fuel consumption than taking our boat back and forth. So I remember riding on the crew boat, like with the crew, and they would just freak out when there was a whale or when there were porpoise outside or anything like that. Like they were oohing and awing, and everyone had their phones out and they're hanging their heads out the window, and they're freaking out. They're like, oh, it's a whale. And I've tried in my life not to take those things for granted. It's difficult when you see it constantly, when it's always part of your life, because I'm over there like, yeah, it's a whale. But I did appreciate the fact that these are people from like New York and California, and they hadn't been to Alaska before. These people had not seen whales in person, right? They had not experienced that. And when you're on the water in Alaska in Southeast, and the whales are breaching off in the distance, and there are gulls flying past, and there are the mountains and the trees, and you can smell the sea air and the pine, it's very different, and it is awe-inspiring. Even to me, even to somebody who had lived there their whole life and had experienced that like every day of their life, it's still something that I was able to appreciate how much it meant to them. And it was pretty cool also getting to see that reflected in people who are experiencing it for the first time. It's one thing that was always cool seeing tourists and stuff that were in Alaska, because it's the awe, the sparkle in their eyes that they're looking at this and experiencing it. And a lot of the crew people, they had an appreciation for it, which I thought was really cool. Now, one thing, though, that did happen is after a while, it started wearing off a little bit, and you would get the people there like, oh, it's another humpback. I'm going to sleep. Because they would then just sleep on the boat ride from Huna over to our island, or our part of the island. And that was kind of funny, because it's like the turning point where people like start adapting and adjusting to, okay, this is just daily life. Like, I think at first they thought it was like a rare occurrence to like see whales and stuff, when it's kind of, they're always there. And you'll see different whales or killer whales or porpoise or whatever, but there's always something like that going on, right? And I don't think they realized that at first, that it was going to be an everyday thing. So then after a while, a lot of them were like, I'm just going to sleep. Especially when you had people that came back for multiple seasons, because they started getting a little numb to it. Now, I know one thing that did freak people out a little bit was the bears. Like, there were a lot of bears. Chichikov Island has either one of or the highest concentration of grizzly bear and brown bear in Alaska. In the world, actually, I think. And they're huge. Like, these are gigantic bears. And they're not marauding crazy monsters that want to eat everything like it's a horror movie, unless they're really hungry. In which case, yes, it can get a little bit like a horror movie. And I don't think that a lot of the individuals that came up there to work on the show really grasped the idea of what it's like to be around those animals, to be very close to those animals, for it to be an everyday thing, and for you to have to constantly watch out for it. Like myself, I don't feel alive unless the possibility of being eaten alive is on the table, right? When I'm just walking around and there's no giant monsters out there, it doesn't feel normal, right? So for us, it's an everyday thing. It was very normal. That was just life, right? You're always watching out for bears. You're always watching out for something that wants to eat you. That's just life. But I think it got to some people that would come up there a little bit. We had a couple people that, like, they showed up. They were kind of cocky about it at first. The first time they actually saw one of these bears, because it doesn't matter how many photos you've seen. It doesn't matter how many videos you've watched. It doesn't matter how many documentaries you've seen or any of this. It doesn't matter until you see it in person, because it's very, very different. It's like the Northern Lights, right? You can see photos and video of it, but until you experience it in person, you don't get it, right? It's impossible to impart the magic of it and the majesty of it on someone without them experiencing it themselves. And bears are very much like that. So there's a stark difference between anything that you could view or experience versus being there in person. So we had at least a couple people that showed up and they're like, oh, this is no big deal. I've been all over the world. And they were real tough guys, right? And then as soon as they saw one of these gigantic bears lumbering out of the forest, and the fact that they would kind of just appear, because they're kind of sneaky. Usually you smell a bear before you see them, because they can move through the forest really quietly. Like way more ninja-like than you would expect. You would expect that these giant lumbering bears would be noisy. And they can be when they don't care, but if they're stalking, they are very quiet. Like, they can move through the forest without making much of any noise at all. And so I think that was something that got a lot of people. But anyway, a couple of these crew people, first time they saw a bear, they were gone. It was the next day they were on the boat out. They were like, not doing this, we're done. Then some of the people, though, they seemed to like it. Like, they were like, no, this is awesome. This is incredible. This is amazing. They were out there taking pictures of them. And we had to, like, the safety people and us were telling them, like, don't get too comfortable, right? Because there was like a stark difference between the people that ran screaming, I can't handle this, and then the people that like, no, this is awesome. I want to get some good photos. And we're like, well, don't get too close, right? Don't get too comfortable. I don't want you to be like drastically afraid of the bears. A little bit of fear is probably a good thing, though. Like, they're not teddy bears, right? It is serious. So, like, that's an in-between thing. Because I remember also they had to have safety meetings, right, with all new crew. And then periodically they would just have safety meetings to kind of remind people, okay, this is serious. This is how it works. Like, one of the things with the bears also was the fact that Bear, my brother Bear, is called Bear. And so you would have like Dad scream out, "Bear, bear," and people would like be like, "Well, what's going on? There's a bear." So the crew, the safety people, they actually came up with that we had to call bears something else, right? They're like, well, we can't just refer to them as bears because it's a boy cried wolf situation, because everyone is going to ignore it if someone says bear because they think they're talking about Bear, my brother Bear, Bear Brown. So they called them Oklahomas, was what they decided on. So anytime there was a bear in the camp or approaching the camp or on the horizon, or there was one within the vicinity, they would call out Oklahoma. And everyone knew that anyone that says Oklahoma, it means there's a bear close, there's a bear within the perimeter, right? So that was kind of funny, and that became sort of a running joke. Oklahoma, but it made sense, though, because you don't want people to think that someone is saying, bear, as in my brother, and they're really talking about an actual bear. So that definitely made sense. Another survival thing is being on the water, being the fact that they had to film a lot of our life on the water, right? Like, a lot of the things we did was on boats, and then their commute back and forth as well can be very serious, because in Alaska, like, the weather and stuff can turn on you really fast, right? And any person that has any experience with boats knows that you don't underestimate the weather. And just because it's only a 40 or 50 minute trip you're on doesn't mean something can't go horribly wrong, right? For the most part, as long as you watch out for the weather and you're taking it seriously and you keep an eye on things, you're going to be fine. But it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be prepared. You have to be prepared for things to go wrong. You got to respect the danger. And I remember one of the things, so in Alaska, let me digress for a minute. In Alaska, the water will kill you. The water is very, very cold, right? You're going to last maybe 3 minutes if you go in the water. And that's if you're a strong, healthy, very, very fit individual, right? You're going to last maybe 3 minutes. And the thing is that 3 minutes is kind of the top, because even at 3 minutes, it's possible that, you're going to get out of the water and then your heart's going to stop. You don't want to warm yourself up too fast when you get out of the water either, because that can make your heart stop as well. Because you can be going into hypothermia, and then if you warm up too fast, your body goes into shock and your heart stops. So the water will take you out. It's very, very serious. We used to play in it when we were kids. I remember when we lived on this one float house when I was really little. I was probably, 6 years old. And I had a life jacket and everything. And Dad, when we were young, he had dipped us in the water. He would take us and dip us in the water, because if we did end up going off the boat, he didn't want us to freak out. He wanted us to know what it felt like. Like, you should be prepared for that, because it is a very jarring thing how it squeezes your lungs and it makes you want to freak out a little bit, because it's very jarring when you go into water that's that cold, right? So Dad, when we were really little, he would dip us in the water and then take us out. He did not expect us to enjoy it as much as we did, and begging to dip us in the water. And so I remember when we lived on this one little float house, and I had my life jacket on, I would run and jump off the float house and then swim back onto the float house. And I would just do that over and over and over until my lips were turning purple. And my mom and Dad were like, "No, stop. You got to get warm now. That's enough." So anyway, back to the story at hand with the crew. So you have to be prepared. And one of the ways to be prepared for a boat going down is that on every boat in Alaska, and this is like a mandatory thing that the Coast Guard actually ensures. The Coast Guard, when they do checks on your boat, make sure that you have what is called a survival suit. So there needs to be a survival suit for every soul on board the boat. And what a survival suit is, it is kind of like a dry suit a wetsuit or a dry suit, except it's a lot thicker. It's a lot thicker, and it's got a big hood on it, and it straps over you, and it's got like built-in flotation, and it's very bright orange, right? Because if you're bobbing around the ocean in one of these things, you want people to notice. You want people to see it. So it can't blend in. It can't look like the ocean. It can't be like navy blue. It's bright orange. You want it bright orange. And they're a little claustrophobic of things to strap into. And they're very well designed. And if you're in a survival suit, you can last in the water. It's going to drastically improve your ability to survive in that cold of water because it's insulated. It's going to keep you warm. It's got built-in flotation, so you're going to be able to float on your back in the water. Hopefully it won't attract too many sharks because I do believe they are kind of attracted to those colors. They are a little bit attracted to the brighter like colors like that. It's why sometimes sharks do, like they will hit buoys and things that you put out. Like I've seen sharks hit a crab pot buoy before in the past. But anyway, with those survival suits, you want to be good at putting it on. It's like I'm always telling people with first aid kits, you do not want the first time you open your first aid kit to be when you need it, right? You need to know what's in the first aid kit and where to go in the first aid kit to get what you need in the event of an emergency. You don't want to be bleeding out the first time you ever open your first aid kit. So it's the same with survival suits. You want to know how to put it on. You want to be very good at putting it on. You want to be able to put it on in a hurry. Because most likely, when you're putting one of those on, you're going to have mere moments to put it on. There's not a lot of warning usually when boats go down. So if you're in a situation where the boat is going down and you need to put one of those suits on, you're going to have to do it very quickly. And you want to do it correctly so that it doesn't leak and so that it's all strapped on perfectly and you're good to go. So I remember the safety people set up the crew. And they had to do this like every season. They had to do it with everyone who was new. If somebody came in mid-season, they had to retake the safety course. And then they would redo the safety course with everyone, whether you had already taken it or not, every season when the season started over. Because fortunately, they had some very good safety people on our show that kept a good eye on the crew and a good eye on everything and made sure that those guys were taken care of. Because that's another thing we couldn't. We did, but it wasn't our job to protect like the crew and the film people and stuff. No, we naturally just look out for everyone, but like the film crew didn't want us to have that on our shoulders, and also for insurance reasons, we couldn't. Like they had to have somebody looking out for them. And fortunately, they had really good safety people. Like the safety guys, super serious. Like very serious, very cool people, the type people that you want coming to rescue you if you fall down a cliff. And so the safety people, they set up basically like this little boot camp for the crew people to learn how to put on their survival suits, to learn how to strap it all on and to squeeze themselves inside it and not to panic and to get it on. And they did like a pass-fail thing, right? It was like they were training to be in the Coast Guard because I remember the one safety guy standing up there like with the stopwatch and he goes, okay, the boat's sinking, go. And he would click it and they would all try to get in their suits. And it's not funny, but to me it was a little funny, and we weren't in on like the safety thing all the time, but I was there a couple times and it was a little funny watching all of them try to squeeze into the suit and try to make it work. And some of them getting a little claustrophobic. And also they did it where in one instance, like it's okay to help each other. And then they would do like solo, like you're not allowed to help anyone. You got to do this on your own, because the likelihood is much like on a plane, secure your own mask first before helping anybody. You need to be able to do it on your own. And so some of the people like kind of took to it. It was no big deal. A couple of them were like surfers and like they were used to that kind of stuff. Other people had no idea what they were doing, and there were definitely some panicking and some freaking out and some people like, I can't do this. And then some people that just the idea of actually needing to do this in an emergency was a lot. But for the most part, everybody got it down. They did it. They figured it out and they embraced it, and it was just part of the adventure. and they learned how to do it. And that's something that you might not realize if you're not a boat person or even a boat person in Alaska, because I don't think if you have a boat in the Bahamas, it's the same thing, right? I don't think you need to have a survival suit if you're in the Bahamas. I think you can kind of just bob around that water, right? You're still going to want something safety orange, I would expect, because you don't want to blend in the sea. But I don't think survival suits are as much of a thing. But in Alaska, if you're on the water, you have to have a survival suit in your boat for every soul on board. It's a must. You got to have it. And you got to be good with it. You got to train. You got to practice. And I was kind of proud of some of the film people with how well they did, with how much they went for it. Because some of them, even though they were terrible at it and they were total city slickers, they really went for it, right? They brought the enthusiasm, they brought their A game, and you got to appreciate that. Because also, like my dad always said, no one is born knowing these things. Nobody's born a lumberjack. Nobody's born a fisherman. Nobody's born a plumber. Nobody's born a podcaster, right? There's a learning curve to all of these things. Like, you just have to go for it. You have to have the gumption. You have to have the grit, and you just gotta do it. And that is something that a lot of the film crew did have. They had the grit, right, to be able to do it. Some of them were quitters. Some of them were terrible. A lot of them were really cool. A lot of them, they had the grit and they brought the spirit with them. But I think that's something that, like, in their line of work, you really need to have, right? So they did bring that with them. Yeah, another thing, looking over, like, my notes over here, another thing I couldn't believe, I remember talking to some of the film people about the prices of things. Because we all would, like, talk to people about asking them, like, where they're from. Like, some of them were from New York or California, and like I said, some of them were surfers and stuff. Some of them had been to Iraq. Some of them were, like, had worked on, like, news and war and all of these things, right? So they came from really interesting backgrounds. And some of them were twerping and they worked on, like, Wheel of Fortune or whatever. Not that that's not kind of cool in its own way, but some of them were, like, Joe Cool type people. And I remember asking a bunch of them these different questions, and we would end up talking to them. And one of the things I could not believe when they told me, and I've later found out, living down here in Washington, that it's all true, just how expensive seafood is. Like, seafood, and y'all guys probably already know this, is incredibly, incredibly expensive. It is insanely expensive. And I personally still can't get over how expensive it is. I have I have eaten millions of dollars in seafood. Millions and millions and millions. I've probably scraped millions of dollars worth of caviar into the ocean gutting fish. But I've definitely eaten millions of dollars in seafood, because in my old life, Dungeness crab, basically anytime I wanted it. I remember having 5-gallon buckets full of shrimp when I was a kid. Not any kind of deer. We're just talking seafood, not anything else. And the amount of fish that we've eaten, the salmon, the halibut, it was nothing for us to just have, freezers full of crab and salmon and all of these things that people pay an arm and a leg for. Like, I couldn't believe that, like, people can pay upwards of, like, $40 for one fish. That's crazy. And, like, the crab, I remember specifically, the crab, like, some of the film people couldn't believe it, right? They couldn't believe just how abundant the food was, and that we were able to go get it the way that we could. Because it was one thing also, like, when we would talk about it, it was another when they actually saw it, right? When they're like, oh, they really do just go out in a skiff, drop a crab pot, go back 2 days later and pull out a feast of crab. And now you can't just take whatever crab. Like, there are rules to it. And one of the things is that you can only take crab of a certain size. And I had, at that time, my Scalbard knife was like a good measuring tool for the crab that you could keep or not. So I had like a notch on my knife so that I knew if the crab was over the notch, good to keep. If it's under it, toss it back. So that was how I pretty much measured out the crab usually. And definitely worked. And I just remember eating so much crab. I'm making myself really hungry. I'm, like, losing my train of thought now, because Dungeness crab is my favorite thing in the world. I could eat Dungeness crab from sunup to sundown every day of my life and never get tired of it. And I would just love some Dungeness crab right now. And to think about in the old days when I would just walk around with like crab legs in my pocket, right, for lunch, and just the buckets of shrimp and things that we had. Like I remember when I was a little kid on that same float house that I would throw myself off and climb back on over and over. There were a lot of shrimp that would hang on the underneath of the float house. And so with Dad's help, I remember taking a paint can and knocking holes in it in the side, right? Like taking a nail and putting holes in the side, and then you lower the paint can over the side, and it was an empty paint can. It didn't actually have paint in it. It was, at any point, it was one of those like you fill it with paint. So it was like a like some of the paint cans you can reuse. You buy them to mix your own paint. And so since we were working on Gypsy, we had a lot of these like not used paint cans, and Dad took a couple of them, helped me knock some holes in it and tie a rope on it, and I would dangle it off the side of the dock, and I would count to like a couple minutes, and then I would pull it up real fast, because what would happen is the shrimp would crawl inside the bucket, and I pull it up real fast, the water drains out of the holes, and then I would just gather the shrimp. And I remember Dad thinking that we were just gonna play with it, and it's like, this is they're just gonna play around. And I remember doing that like it was a job for all day and doing it for multiple days. And I remember one day having a really good haul, because we just did it like basically all day as if we were like commercial shrimpers out there. And we got a lot. We filled like 2 5-gallon buckets full of shrimp or something like that. Maybe it wasn't quite that much, but at my age at the time, it really seemed like a lot. And I remember Dad being impressed. I remember Dad having that twinkle in his eye and being impressed with how well we did and the catch that we brought home. But that was cool. And when you live subsistence like that in our old lifestyle, it's a lot different, and you're really able to live off the land in that way. And I think that's something that did amaze a lot of the film crew and people who, shop at grocery stores and think that, all food comes from a grocery store, right? I think the concept of being able to actually live off the land and go get your food, and to be able to do it in a way that's not grungy, right? Like most people think, oh, you're living off the land, oh, it's all gamey and it's right? But in reality, we're having like feasts. We're eating food that other people pay hundreds and hundreds of dollars for. Every meal was a restaurant quality, amazing seafood meal. And then, like I said, no doubt I have eaten millions of dollars of seafood in my life. I am making myself very hungry. Another thing with like the lifestyle and the living subsistence and the things like that, one thing, they couldn't believe the water. Like I remember one of the film people, one of the producers, they thought you had to boil all the water. Now, most of the film people thought like this because like people are, conditioned to think that you have to have water that comes from a bottle, or it has to be, cleaned in a plant somewhere, or it's got to go through filter systems and all this, or it'll make you sick. And that's simply not the case. In the real world, there wouldn't be any life on Earth if that was the case, if it really did work like that, because, for the majority of all time, humans and every other creature out there, we just drink water out of the ground the way God intended. The thing is that you don't want to drink stagnant water. You don't want to drink water that's holding still. Right? Never drink water that is holding still, because that's when it's going to have bacteria building up. That's when there are going to be mosquitoes and all these bugs laying their eggs and their larvae in it and all this stuff. That's when there's going to be algae growing in it. That's when you're going to get all of this bacteria and stuff in it that's going to make you sick if the water's holding still. If you are looking at a creek or a river, or a stream, and it's flowing pretty good, and it's aerating, and it's got bubbles in it, and it's clear, and it's flowing strong, then it's good to drink. It's good to drink. You do not have to boil that water. I've drank water out of a creek my entire life, and it's one of the things, besides the seafood, that I drastically miss about Alaska is the quality of water. The fresh, crystal clear, high quality H2O. I very much miss that. I so badly miss being able to go over to a crystal clear, beautiful stream and just stick my head inside it and drink my fill. And so cold, so crisp, so good. Does not take, if you've never done that, then you have no idea what I'm talking about, and you can't even fathom it. You cannot imagine it. You can't even picture it in your head, because it's not like nice cold filtered water. It's nothing like, spring water that you get in a bottle. I don't care how good the bottled water it is. I don't care how expensive it is. I don't care where they bottled it, what company does it, or how they fixed it. It is not creek water. It is not river water. It is not amazing, beautiful, wonderful Alaskan drinking water. And if you're ever in Alaska, if you're ever fortunate enough to be around those creeks and streams and rivers, get some water. Get down there and get a drink like you're a caveman, because that's the way God intended. And the thing is, too, with a lot of that water, you're getting all the natural nutrients and minerals, because the water is supposed to flow over the rocks, and it's supposed to flow out of the earth. That's how you're supposed to drink the water. Just don't drink the stagnant water. You want a creek, a river, a stream that is flowing and beautiful and gorgeous. And like, if you watch the show and when we were on Chichikov Island, and I'm pretty sure that there was, that you saw me like gathering water and stuff a lot, and us filling up our water jugs and things. We weren't boiling that water. Like, you don't have to. It's beautiful. It's amazing. And I do remember also, like, the producer trusting me that, like, you can drink that water. And that it is okay. And never forget the look. Because when you taste that water for the first time, it does something to you. It changes something, because it's incredible and it's amazing. And I know I've talked for like 10 minutes about the water, but I'm pretty enthusiastic about the water, because it's incredible. It's good for you. It's amazing. And there's a massive misconception about what is good water or not. And it's really just about the water flowing. And I remember they asked me, what if there was like a dead animal, like a little ways up in the creek or something like that? And my response, as always, is you would taste it. Like, I would taste it. I would know, right? And I was actually always the water guy in the family, even more than my dad. My dad always trusted me. Everyone in the family trusted me to be the guy to go over to the water and take a scoop and taste it and tell you if it was good or not, because there were many times where I would do that and it'd be like, wonderful, good to go. There were a few times when I'd be like, something's off. Nope, don't drink this. We need to find another creek, because I can taste it. And when you know what amazing good water tastes like, it's very easy to determine when it's good or not, when there is something off about it. And you just got to be aware of that, and you have to learn those nuances to it. And I was always honored that I was that guy. I was always the dude that said, this is good, the good water, we're getting it here, or don't get it here, we need to find another source. And I miss that water. I miss that water so much. I remember the first time I ever went to New York City. Couldn't handle the water. Could not handle the water. It was so bad. The water, like, if you like that and you live somewhere like that and you're good with it, God bless you. But I can't take it. Could not take it. I remember taking a shower in New York City, and I smelled like I just came out of a public pool, is what it reminded me of. I smelled so much like chlorine. There was so much chlorine in my hair that I actually had to go. I remember going down to a small store that was near where I was staying, and I bought up a few gallons of water and took it back, and I had to wash my hair with that water. I had to rinse the chlorine from the tap water out of my hair, because I just couldn't take it. It was too much. And then the water, like here in northern Washington, a lot of it's like well water, and can be good for you, can have minerals, and it be all right water, depending where you're getting it and how deep they go, and whether it's artesian or whatever with the different lines of underground water. But it doesn't compare. It doesn't compare to the Alaska water. I miss that. Yeah, back on the bear safety. Another thing with the bears also was the bear spray and stuff. This is another thing I was going to talk about with the bears, because like the bear spray didn't it doesn't work. I hate to say it, like it okay. It works to the point that you're going to freak a bear out if it's the first time he's ever experienced bear spray, right? But it also depends on the bear, and it depends on the mood of the bear, and it depends on how hungry the bear is, and it depends on where you get the bear. So I personally would not bet my life on bear spray working. It might work also better on smaller bears and things like that, but giant grizz up in Alaska, yeah, not the best. Not the best. If you don't have anything else, and also it's a good non-lethal deterrent, but it is something that only works to a limit. And also, interesting thing, and experts can disagree if they want to, but I have seen some bears get into bear spray and bite into it, like when they were rummaging through some totes that the crew had left out, right? They had left some totes at our camp, and some bears got into it, and a bear bit into the bear spray, right? And you would think that it would have freaked it out, right? And that it would just run away screaming. But the bear treated it the same way we would treat hot sauce, is what it kind of did. Because the bear at first sort of freaked out and like jumped around, and then he came back over to the canister and started licking it and like chewing on it. And then he would kind of freak out and shake his head a little bit, and then he would go back to the canister and continue to lick it and eat it. So I found that interesting. I thought that was kind of interesting, because it was like bear hot sauce is what it was at that point. So is it better than nothing? Yes. Would I recommend betting your life on it working? No. I would say best bet is just don't get in a situation where you need to use it. If it's all you have, definitely not a bad idea to have it on you. And much like a warning shot, like when you fire, like if you got to fire your rifle off in the air to scare off a bear, it's going to work the first few times. After like the third time, it's not going to work anymore, because they're pretty used to being, the toughest thing out there, and they're not really that scared of anything. They can get startled by stuff they don't recognize. So that's like if a bear hasn't been around guns being fired like that, it'll scare it off like the first couple of the 3 times. But then after that, since nothing bad has happened to the bear except the loud noise, it gets used to it. And I think that's probably kind of the same way it is like with the bear spray, is they would just kind of get used to it. Also, meaner bears, tougher bears, they might just shake it off. Oh yeah, that is one thing. Like no one was allowed to walk alone. Everyone had to have the bear spray. Smart though. Like in our life, you don't walk off without telling people where you're going. You do not do that. You don't walk away alone. You don't, just disappear to go, do whatever, or use the bathroom in the woods, or whatever you need to do. And you don't walk from one camp to the other or anything like that without telling people, I'm doing this, I'm going over here, come looking for me if I'm not back in a few minutes. And then if you're like going somewhere and back, or you're walking to the boat or down the beach or things like that, very much a good idea to like take someone with you. And I remember the crew, they had to travel in pairs or with multiple people. Typically they would have safety people split off with the different, sets of people that would go places, because they took safety very seriously. The safety people did. Which is a good thing they did. They kept everybody alive. Nobody got seriously injured, and nobody got eaten. So that's a good thing. But again, the bears are just living their life. They're living their life. They exist in the world that they exist in. And you have to remember when you're in places like that it's their world too, right? Like everybody has this misconception that humans exist outside of nature, and that's very much not true. We're all part of nature. We're all part of nature. And you're existing in their world, and they're existing in your world. And as long as you understand that, and as long as you appreciate that, then you can totally coexist with the bears and the wild animals. Because the bears and the wild animals always learned to accept that we were there, and we always learned and accepted that they were there, because it's part of that life, it's part of that world. And as long as you realize that and you accept that, then you become part of that world. And I definitely think that the crew embraced that in a lot of ways, and the ones that didn't ran screaming. So it all worked out. There are a lot of aspects of working in reality television that you're probably somewhat familiar with, and I'm sure there are a lot of aspects of reality TV that you're not. There are things that you might not realize or know unless you've been in that world and had that experience. Now, I cannot speak for anyone else's experience in reality television. I can only speak for my own. I can only talk about the things that I have personally experienced and the things that have transpired during our time in reality television. And for us, our experience, my experience in reality TV has been very genuine. It's been very honest and very genuine and very much just documenting our life and the way that we live. And for the most part, it was very easy to just go about our daily life as if the cameras weren't there for us to just do what we would have done anyway. One of the strangest aspects, actually, of cameras following you around was that every now and then they would come up to you and stop you from doing what you were doing and ask you to explain what you were doing or talk about what you were doing. And that is referred to as, there are two versions of what they call an OTF, which is where you stop and give a little bit of an interview. One is when you're actually in the middle of doing what you're doing. Like if I were here and I'm nailing a board to the wall and I'm constructing something, and while I'm doing that, they would come up with the camera and ask me to say what I was doing and explain it. And then the other version of what they call an OTF is a little bit of more just a standing interview that is done in the moment while you're doing what you're doing. So I would get through, let's say I got through nailing that board to the wall, and then I would go and I would stand there while they would come up with the camera and ask me questions about what had just transpired. And those moments and those kinds of interviews usually happened when something had just happened, when something had just either gone wrong or gone very right, or plans had changed, or there was something going on that needed further illustration. Like, let's say that a couple of us just got in an argument, or someone just dropped a tree on my head. You might have to stop in that moment, and a producer would come up with the camera and be like, God, can we talk about that for a second? How did that make you feel? And then you go into, talking about it and whatnot. And then there are the sit-down interviews, which come a little bit later. Those are the interviews where you're actually sitting down talking about the things that transpired and going over it in a little bit more detail. In one way, those interviews are weird because it's very much, spotlight on you. It's very much like in your face, right? And you're being asked all these questions. It was never too much of a problem for me. My biggest problems, and I've said this before, was that I either have a habit of giving one-word answers about things. I'm either the person that says, like they ask how hard something was, and I was like, very, very hard. That was very hard, difficult. Or I'm the person that is like a character written by Tarantino, and I have a tendency to meander around a little while and go back and forth and then over here and then back over here and then eventually get to my point. Now, I generally always have a point that I get back to, but it may take a little while to get there. The journey, I think, is the fun part with that. And I always do have a destination that we're eventually going to find ourselves at. But when doing sit-down interviews like that, you got to be a little bit more concise. You have to bring it in a little bit. You got to give more than a one-word or two-word answer, more than a single syllable. But you also cannot go on like a soliloquy. You can't just keep going and going. So you have to be, there's a certain way to kind of do it. And you get more used to that as the years go, and as not just the years but the interviews. The more that you do it, like anything, the easier it gets to do and recollect what you're doing and understand how to convey the things in a concise, intelligent manner that gets your point across. At least I think I got better at doing it. There are other things that go into reality TV, like just logistically, because it's a lot of times it's difficult to logistically do what you need to do. Like, for instance, we've been asked a lot of times, and there have been a lot of people that have talked about whether or not we stayed in hotels. And the truth of that is, yes, we did stay in hotels. Did we live in a hotel? No. Did we stay in a hotel? Yes. Who hasn't stayed in a hotel? There are multiple reasons why we might stay in a hotel. Let's say that you go to town and you want to take a regular shower instead of bathing in the creek, and you're going to drop your clothes in an actual laundromat and wash everything you own real quickly instead of washing it in a creek. And you're going to do all this all day, and you're going to go shopping, and you're going to buy the tools and supplies that you need, and you're going to buy your beans, sugar, and bullets, and you're going to get everything together. And you might not feel like jumping on the boat and heading back home that same day, because also this is not a trip to the grocery store. We're not swinging down to the 7-Eleven and then going right back to where we came from, right back to our house. This is not down the block. Like it's a much bigger deal when you have to travel from where you are by boat. You know, you got to skiff to the boat, and you got to pull the anchor and start up the boat and take the boat into town and then dock the boat and then go do everything that you're supposed to do and then head out. And sometimes you don't want to spend the night on the boat. Sometimes you want to go have a nice night at a hotel and be able to take 45 showers in one day, because that's something that a lot of people that haven't lived that lifestyle just don't realize, and they take it for granted. Like, I'm sure that the majority of people listening to my voice right now, if you wanted to, could just go take a hot shower. And that has not always been an option, and is not always an option for some of the people that are probably listening to my voice right now. And there are definitely some people listening to my voice right now that know what I'm talking about. So having the option to go take a nice hot shower is always fun. And spending a couple nights in a hotel while you're in town, or just spending the night in a hotel, is fun too. You get to go in, you get to watch a little bit of TV, you get to take some showers, and then you head back out to the bush. And then there were several instances of like Noah wanting to do stuff at the dump, right? And of course, the film crew wanted to film that, and we have very early start times because there's not a lot of light in Alaska. And in the time period that we were filming, there was only so much daylight, right? So we had to kind of start with the sun. You started at sunup, right? Because also when you're filming, there's logistical things of them having to put batteries in the cameras. They're having to put a microphone on you. They have to get the camera people in place before you can, like, you know, go do what you need to do. We're like, just let us at them. And they're like, no, let our camera guys get in there first, because we want to film you doing this, right? So there are logistical aspects like that are time consuming. And that's something you might not realize. That's another reality of reality television, is that it is time consuming. There are setups and there are nuances to these things. Even if you're just going to go in and be filmed doing what you're doing, they got to get the cameras rolling and up and going and sound hooked up to you so that people can hear you talking and everything else. So to do a lot of those things, we had to go to town, spend the night, and then do it in the morning, right? So you would go to town. And also, if we're splitting up, we only had the one boat, then we're not going to leave everybody stranded at Browntown without the boat. So like a few times, myself and whoever else was doing stuff in town would ride in with the crew on their boat and spend the night at a hotel, and then in the morning do our thing and go around town. And Noah, we get to play in the junkyard and do all those things. And they would film us doing all this. And then we would most likely head back to the island, or we would spend the night in the hotel and head back with the crew in the morning, since they were going back there anyway. And then there were other times where we just brought the boat in and we were doing our town stuff, and we stayed at the harbor in the boat because we had a boat in the harbor. But I was never one to turn down a night in a hotel and a hot shower, and neither really was anybody else. No, there were many times, though, we didn't feel like doing that. We were like, nah, let's just stay on the boat. I don't want to have to deal with the hotel and the people and all that stuff. So there's just nuances to that. And then the other thing as well with something like that is, so when you exist in the world, there are always going to be individuals that like you, individuals that don't like you, and the majority of people are just going to be indifferent to your existence. That's going to be the majority of people. Now, that's for everyone that's ever lived, ever will live, or is living now. But those kinds of things are very personified and amplified when you exist in front of the curtain. Because you can live your life behind the curtain, like most people do, or you can live your life in front of the curtain, like we have chosen to do, and like a lot of people choose to do. And whether you are an internet influencer, somebody that just puts a little bit of their life online, or you're somebody that is movie star status, that still counts as being in front of the curtain. And if you're in front of the curtain, You could more easily unmilk a cow than put that back. You can't get back behind the curtain. Once you step out, you're there. And with us and with our show, it jumped up really fast. It went from basically nobody having any idea who we were to being very out there very quickly, right? And the thing is that it just gets very personified when you're out there like that, how people look at you, how many people are talking about you. And there are going to be people that are like, oh, wow, this is awesome. I love this. I love what these people stand for. Family, faith, freedom. This is great. You'll look at these crazy guys out there living their life on their own terms. And then you're going to have some people that, for whatever reason, whether they just have a miserable life and they want to make everybody else miserable, or whether they're jealous of how you are and how you live, or that you're on TV, or that you have the gumption to put yourself out there in whatever way, or any of those things, there are always going to be people that want to like bring you down. There are always going to be people that hate you for some reason. And again, that's amplified when you exist in front of the curtain, when you're not behind the curtain. So if you're seen going in and out of a hotel even one time, if you want to go to town and you want to watch some TV and you want to spend the night in an air-conditioned hotel room and you want to have 20 baths in one night because you can, because there's running hot water, and somebody sees you going to and fro, and they're a person that already doesn't like you, then it's very easy for them to go, oh, these people are so fake. They're living in a hotel in town. I saw them there once. And that's just the way it is, and there's nothing you can do about that. Now, I myself have never cared what anyone thought of me. I think that's one reason why I have no problem with being in the public eye, no problem being in front of the curtain. I've never been somebody that really blends in. My parents taught me my whole life, don't try to blend in, don't try to stand out, just be you, be real, be who you are. And that's how I've always lived my life. And myself, I believe in two things above everything else: freedom and personal responsibility. And I think that if you take personal responsibility for everything that you think, say, and do, then you should be able to live your life any way that you see fit, provided that no one else gets hurt. And you don't negate someone else's freedom to live their life the way they want to. And that's the bush life. That is life in the bush. And there were so many people that were just really enthusiastic about the show and about what we were doing. And so that's another thing that is a reality of reality television, is the way that it changes how you interact with the world, how the world interacts with you, how everything transpires in your life gets very different. It gets a little bit different. Very different and a little bit different, because there are nuances to the way that it's different, and then there's some stuff that is just overtly very different. But for the vast majority of everything that has transpired since we started doing the show has been overwhelmingly positive. Overwhelmingly positive. And it's really cool just how many people enjoy being honorary members of the Wolfpack, and how many people enjoy being part of all of our crazy misadventures. We had a difficult time even realizing why people would want to watch us on TV and would want to do that, because for us, it was just our daily life. Just our daily life. Like, an interesting thing that we got asked a lot, like at the start of every season and at multiple times throughout filming the show, we would get asked, so what's something that you do differently than other people? What's something that is strange about the way you would do something versus someone else? And we were never able to answer that question. We could never answer that. Who can answer that? Because again, my perspective is only from my perspective. So to me, even if it's something that I do that is different than other people, or strange or unusual or whatever, I don't know that, because it's just the way that I do things. So when it came to my family, it's just the way that we lived. It was just our life. And so it's difficult for us to point that stuff out. And then we'd be doing something and we would do it like a weird way. And all of a sudden, one of the producers would jump up and be like, that thing, you're doing that thing. Explain what this thing is, because nobody else does this thing this way. And so that was always interesting. That was interesting. And there were some people that took part in the show And there were some people that really shied away from it. Like there'd be some places where like, oh, I want to do this thing or I want to go here. But because our whole life was being documented, it had to be involved in the show. And the people were like, no, thank you. And so you couldn't do that thing. And then there were other people that were like, yeah, I'll totally do it. You know, in the way of some people were like, yeah, this is awesome. I want to be part of this. And then other people were just totally indifferent to it. And they're like, whatever. I don't care if there's a camera there. So you'd get a lot of those differences in that way. And I remember another thing, we had to take part in the safety meetings. Kind of interesting, right? Like we had to take part in the safety meetings, even though we could have been giving the safety meetings. And I might have talked about this on my last episode, my last solo one, because I was going over a lot of the different safety things. But it was just something that I was thinking about as I'm talking, because it was very interesting. And then there are nuances, like when you're in the safety meeting, hearing them talk about the things that they're warning people of that like you don't, realize that needs to be taught because it's something that's so ingrained in you. It's something that you are so used to, like them being told not to look away from a falling tree, not to stand under a tree that's being cut down, watch out for chainsaws, that kind of thing, because that's just an obvious way of behaving in that environment for us. It's just a very obvious thing that you're supposed to do. And there's, I guess, a lot of nuances in that way that there's just daily life for us and things you don't realize that needs to be gone over. And I definitely appreciated the fact that they did that, and all the safety people always took things very, very seriously, very seriously. Now, there were a lot of aspects of filming on the water, too, that was pretty difficult. Just because it was time consuming and there was, logistical concerns about going from here to there. And there would be some times where it would be that we needed to go somewhere. We were doing something, we were traveling, we were transporting something, we were going to and fro, and there would be a storm kick up. And we'd be like, nope, this is where we're going to be for probably the next 5 to 6 days. We're just going to drop the anchor and this is where we're going to be. And they'd be like, can't we just go? Let's do the thing. And time is money and film and all this. Would be like, nope, you're going to get a lot of good shots of the mountains and the water because this is where we're going to be. Because we're just not going anywhere until the storm passes. Because that's what you have to do when you live on the boats. And it's something that is just a daily occurrence really in Alaska because the weather can shift just so fast. It can shift so fast. And then the hours put in as well, like the hours that you put into filming is something that people probably don't realize. That's another reality of reality television. It's a lot of hard work. And it's a lot of hard work for the people involved. Like the crew definitely put in a lot of hard work, a lot of hard hours, a lot of time, a lot of standing in the rain, soaking wet. While we did what we were doing, and yeah, we were soaking wet too, but it's our life. Like that's just how we lived. We hardly even noticed it was raining. I mean, you'll notice Gaby barely wore a shirt, right? Like we didn't notice a lot of it, but a lot of the crew would just be miserably uncomfortable, like a bunch of drowned rats, right? And they would still just be go-getters, standing with a smile on their face and just filming and running around and trying to keep up with us and our craziness. And they worked really hard. And there would be like, easily 12-hour days, 14-hour days, and they never stopped, hardly ever complained, nothing like that. So a lot of them were really go-getters. Like I've said before, some of them didn't make it very long. Some of them like jumped ship near immediately. They're like, just, this isn't for me. And then there were other ones that never really complained, seemed to actually really enjoy it. Like it's what they do, right? It's what they do. And then for us, long hours is just a way of life. Like we were just living our life and doing our thing. So for us to work from sun up to sundown, well, it was just what we were doing anyway. Right? We were building a house. We were working on our boat. We were going from here to there. We were hauling boards up the beach. We were building things. We're, busting wood and stacking it for winter and doing all that. And so there's just a lot of those things that you do all the time anyway. And some of it they were really fascinated by. And there's a lot of stuff that definitely didn't make it onto the show. Like, for instance, and here's a little bit of warning. I don't want to gross anybody out, but there is a way to tan hides naturally, and so we don't waste anything. Like if we hunt, when we kill a deer, we use all of it. We eat all of it. We eat the whole animal. We use every bit of it, and that of course includes the hide. And now most modern tanneries and people that tan hides, they use chemicals and they use components and things to tan the hides. But there is a natural way to do that where you just use the oil from the brain of the animal to tan the hide. And so I won't go into graphic detail, but I did a how-to showing the film crew how to do this and how to make that work. And they filmed the whole thing. And it was all done. I did it very well, and from beginning to end, over the course of however long it took me to do it, and that never made it onto TV. Apparently, that was a little too much. I guess it was a little too much, and so that didn't make it on. I thought it was incredibly interesting, and also something that is very important to know, in my opinion, because if you're actually in a survival situation like that where you need to make a buckskin, where you need to actually make the leather last, because that's something that isn't really covered a lot in like survival shows or in movies where you see people stranded and they take a bear skin and they make a bear skin coat out of it, because there are things you have to do to make that work. You can't just take a skin of an animal and wrap it around you and call it leather. That's not how it works. So there are things you have to do to tan the hide so that it lasts and it doesn't rot and it turns into leather and it turns into buckskin. And buckskin from a deer is very, very versatile. It is very strong. Buckskin from a deer is very strong. It is incredibly advantageous to be able to know how to make that in the wild and in a survival situation. And so that's why I wanted to teach people how to do it, and I included that in the show. And unfortunately, it didn't make it on, though, as far as I know. As far as I know, that didn't make it. Now, another thing I was going to talk about last time that I didn't get to, because I talked a bit about bear safety and the bears and all that stuff. And so if y'all guys have seen the show, you already know that bears kind of broke into the house in Browntown, and they did it multiple times. Now, this happened because there was a window on the porch. Now, I told everybody, and I told Dad, who knew better, and I told everyone, don't put a window on the porch. See, the house was built far enough off the ground that even as big as the bears up there are, they couldn't get to the windows on the side of the house, right? They're not going to climb up the side of the house and bust in the window. So because they're lumbering around outside, and for the most part, unless they can see inside or have some reason or to think that there's something inside, then they're not even going to really realize there is an inside, right? To them, that house is just solid, and they'll just go around it unless they like smell something inside, hear something inside, or can see inside, because they're not stupid, but they just don't readily think about, oh, that's a house. They don't recognize it as a thing. Unless they know what it is, unless they've figured that out, unless they've come across it before, unless they're familiar with the idea of a house. Because then when they realize that, then they do recognize it, and they do know that there's stuff on the inside. But our house in Browntown, the house was built far enough off the ground that bears getting in through like the side windows was not an issue. It was not a problem. It was not something we had to worry about. But Mom and Dad, mostly Mom, wanted a porch window. They wanted a window on the porch so that they could look out the front of the house. And I was like, why do you need a window on the porch? We have windows on the side. We have windows on the back. You got a bunch of windows upstairs. You can see out of the house in all these different angles. Why put a window on the porch where we have stairs leading to the porch, and then there's the porch itself? And we know for a fact that bears can use stairs. And they're going to walk up those stairs, and they're going to look in the window, and they're going to realize there's an inside, and they're going to want to come inside. And while you're there, not as much of a problem. right? When we're running generators during the day or a little bit at night, and when you're running generators at night and a little bit during the day, and you're going around and you've established your area, like the bears realize that, okay, the Browns live here now, let's go around them. But then when you leave, then when you go somewhere, then when you take the boat to do a transport job, or you just want to go out fishing for a few days, or you're going to town to get your supplies and you decide not to come back that night, well, then the bears are going to get curious, because all of a sudden there's no noise. All of a sudden there's no lights. All of a sudden these human animals that have been living in this spot for so long and being so noisy aren't there. So for the first night, they might not come around. They might just be used to you and be like, oh, they'll be back. The second night, they're going to come around. They're going to look. They're going to check out the perimeter. And if they're like, oh, there doesn't appear to be anybody home, it gets all Goldilocks all of a sudden, except it's reversed because it's the bears, breaking in. And they're going to check it out. They're going to meander around. They're going to look at things. They're going to chew on things. And they're going to mosey on up your porch. And then that's what happened. So we had gone somewhere for a few days, and a bear, a rather large bear, moseyed up onto the porch. And a lot of this was caught on camera because we had trail cams and stuff like that you set out that are motion activated. And it filmed the bears lumbering up the porch. And the bear looks inside like he's Yogi the Bear. And then he kind of, presses his face on the glass, and then, one paw, pretty much all it takes, and then smash. And then he climbs inside because he's curious, and he looks around. And that would have been bad enough. Lumbering bear, using the restroom in the corner because they're not toilet trained or housebroke. And then just, chewing on your stuff and walking around and sleeping in the bed, which one of them, yes, literally slept in one of the beds. You could tell it made the night there, that it made a little bed, a little nest in there, and it went to sleep. And the big issue, one of the big issues of the bear being inside, was that it stepped on a canned good. So again, you can't smell through a canned good, and it doesn't recognize that a canned good is food. Because to it might as well be a rock or whatever. It doesn't equate to that being food. However, once it stepped on a canned good and food popped out, and then it started eating that food from the canned good, then it got the idea in its head, well, wait a second, I stepped on that and food came out. I wonder what else in here I can step on and food will come out. So the bear proceeded to step on everything. It stepped on everything. It went around squishing everything in the house. Everything in the house that it could get its hands on. It chewed on the kitchen cabinets. It clawed the walls. There were markings everywhere. It was pretty disgusting when we got back. And had to clean all that up. And then the bears, of course, they come around that night because they're like, oh, the Browns left. These human animals are gone. It's our territory again. So, of course, they come right back the next night, even though there is noise at that point, because then they're just curious and they're like, oh, I need a snack. Let's go to the Browns. And then, of course, they show up and then they just leave, because, again, it's not like a horror movie. They don't want trouble. They just, they're living their life, and you have to respect the fact that they're living their life and you're in their world. We're all sharing the world together. We should all share the world with each other and with the animals and be able to coexist and realize that we're all sharing this wonderful, beautiful, crazy existence and just, live our lives and go about our day, which is what the bears did. And then they went about their day until we left again. And I, again, warned everyone in the family and told Mom and Dad, why don't we board up that window? Why don't we cover that wall? Just build the wall out to get rid of the window space and just board it up. The bears are not going to be able to, break their way through the 2x2s and all of the boards that we're going to put up in the siding and everything else. They're not going to, tear their way through the wall. So just put the wall up and let's get rid of the silly porch window idea. But they were like, nope, let's put a new window in because we want to be able to see out the porch. This happened probably 4 times before they're like, okay, maybe we should get rid of the porch window. which was just hilarious. At this point, it just got to be kind of funny because it was hilarious. It was really funny. And actually, to show you how well it works when you don't have a window they can see in, I was actually living in the trapper shack that we originally built when we first got there. So we had what we called the MASH tent. It was like a military tent that most of us lived in. And then we had built a little trapper shack as well. And I say I because I way reinforced it and actually built it out on the inside more like a little room, and it was stout. It was built like a tiny little house. But it didn't have any windows. Like, you couldn't see in it. And so the bears, they would just lumber right past, and they would walk right past it, and they didn't really acknowledge it at all. Sometimes they'd like brush against the side, or they would like claw at it a little bit to say hello, but they didn't like try to get in there. And one fun thing I would like to do is at night, sometimes I would sit on the roof of the trapper shack because I built it out where it had a flat roof. I did away with the original roof. I built it out where it had a flat roof, and I put plywood on it and everything, really thick plywood. And I had a chair up top up there, and I would sit up there and I'd watch the bears at night, because even when they were skirting the area, there was still quite a few times where they would come in at night and they would check out the camp, or they would go sit by where we had the campfire, and they would just lumber around. And I would sit up there and just watch them and take pictures and stuff. I didn't have a good night vision camera at that time that I could really film with. But more than filming them, I just enjoyed sitting up there and communing with nature in that way and watching them. I guess to normal people, that would be a bit like diving with the sharks. It'd be like people that go into shark cages and stuff like that, because I was just on the roof of my trapper shack sitting there in my folding chair. Well, all these bears, meandered around, and I think 6 or 7 was the most I counted at one time that were there. Because there was one night, it was really bright. There was a really full moon. It was super bright, not a cloud in the sky. It was so pretty. It was really quiet. It was super clear and beautiful, and smelled fantastic. It was just one of those magical nights. Like, you could almost see the fairies darting between the trees. It was so magical. And then in come these bears lumbering. At first it was like 3 or 4 of them, and then it was like 6 or 7 of these gigantic grizzly bears, and a few smaller ones. There were a few young ones and a couple older ones. And it is sort of rare to see that many at one time, because bears are not they're not herd animals. Like typically you're only going to see a few in an area, or you're going to see a mother with her cubs, or you might see a couple mothers hanging out with their children, that kind of thing, because they're sort of social animals, but they're also kind of leery of each other a little bit. And so they're kind of solitary, but a little bit social, kind of like people. So it is a little unusual to see that many, but it was 6 or 7 bears that were just meandering around the camp and lumbering around. And it's really cool to watch an animal that is that majestic and magical in its environment, that is so devoid of the contamination of the outside world and of humans. And it is really cool to watch them in their element like that. And when they don't really realize like they're being watched, or didn't care that I was there. And it's really cool, because they're super, super cool creatures, the giant grizzly bear. They're really cool. They're super powerful. They're majestic. They're really smart. They're clever creatures. And they're just a really interesting animal. And it's different when you're like watching a documentary, or you're looking at photos, or you're reading about them in a book, than it is when you're sitting like 10 feet away from one, and you're watching it walk around, and watching it interact with its children, and watching them have a little picnic over there by the tree, and dig for grubs in the fallen log that's been sitting there decomposing. They're really cool. They're really cool animals, and that is something that I definitely miss about Alaska. I miss the water, and I miss the seafood, and I miss the fresh water, and the creeks and the rivers and the streams, and I definitely miss like the wild animals, though, because there's something about being part of a world like that. There's something about being in a world that is still wild, being in a world that is still connected to that primal past that we all have. And I think that is something that everyone kind of longs for, whether they realize it or not. I think it's one reason why people gravitated towards and still gravitate towards a lifestyle like ours and our show, and why people responded the way that they did and have and still do to Alaskan Bush People, because there's something about that primal connection to nature and to that visceral, honest, hard, dangerous, free way of life. I think there's a draw to that. And even individuals that don't want to physically go do that, it's still very interesting and a little awe-inspiring maybe to watch individuals that are doing that and do live their life that way and want to live their life that way. Because it's something that has always just been the way that it is for us, because freedom is very important. Being able to live your life the way you want to, being able to do what you want to and say what you want to and think what you want to and dress the way that you want to. And like that's another thing, like dressing the way that you want to. A lot of people have the misconception that if you live in Alaska, that if you're a bush person, it means you're going to wear rain gear all the time and you're always going to be wearing rubber. And that's just not the case. Like, there are times to wear rain gear, but in your day-to-day, you're not going to wear it constantly. No bush person that really lives out there in the bush is constantly wearing rain gear. That's just not a thing. In fact, it's very common in the bush for people to wear leather jackets. Like, that's something that a lot of people tried to give us a hard time about, I guess. Like, I don't read a lot into any of those things, but so I've been told it's a thing of people talking about, like, the leather jackets and stuff that we always wore. That is a bush way of dressing, right? Because I think a misconception with that is that in people's world, in what they call the real world, and don't get me started on that, because, the real world exists beyond the horizon. The real world is not concrete and steel and glass. That's the fake world. It might be the world that has the most amount of people, but that's not the real world. The real world is forests and trees and rivers and the ocean, and it exists beyond the horizon. That's the real world. There are just less people living in the real world, so the majority of people call their world the real world, even though it's not. That's the man-made world. That's the fake world. That's the world that people have built. And if you have existed in that world, then you view things like leather jackets and such as decorative items. You look at it like a fashion statement, right? In our world, fashion is survival. In our world, the leather jacket is not a fashion statement. It's something that you wear because it lasts basically forever. If you take good care of it, you can pass it down to your children. A leather jacket will last a lifetime, a good one. And I'm not talking fake leather. I'm talking real leather. It's got to be real leather, or it's not going to have the durability that it needs to. It's not going to be tough and rugged and last. If you've got a real leather jacket and you've got a well-made leather jacket, it'll last you a lifetime, and it's going to protect you from the elements, from injuries. It's going to conform to your body. It's going to carry your body heat, and it's going to stay warm with you. Even if a leather jacket is soaking wet, it's still going to heat with your body heat, right? And it takes a lot to get a leather jacket soaking wet as well. Because if you use the traditional way of taking care of your leather and you put like mink oil on it, and, boot polish is another one that works. If you boot polish and then mink oil your jacket, it'll shed water like a duck. And it takes a lot to get a jacket like that sopping wet. And leather jackets, they last, and they're way more comfortable than wearing rubber all the time. You don't want to wear rubber all the time. If you're going to be out there actually living that lifestyle and actually in the elements and actually existing in that world, it's much better to wear leather or to wear buckskin. There is a reason why that's what the mountain men wore. There's a reason why that is still a popular way of dress if you're somebody that exists in that world and lives that lifestyle. Like I said, there's a time and place and whatnot for wearing the rain gear and all of those things. But every day, no. And also, The rubber is uncomfortable. The rubber can rip, it can tear, it can break. It's extremely hard to repair rubber and rain gear. It's very easy to repair leather if it rips. All you need is good thread and the ability to sew. That's it. You can repair a leather jacket. I mean, I've made a lot of my leather jackets. I'm actually currently right now making a leather jacket because it's a different story for a different time, but the leather jacket that I wore on the show for so long and that I really loved actually got stolen. Somebody broke into my truck and stole it. They bashed out the back window and stole it, which is ridiculous and crazy. And like I said, story for another time. But I'm actually myself right now making a new leather jacket because I couldn't find one that was what I wanted. And so I'm just putting one together. I'm sewing it myself. I've always been pretty handy with a needle. So it's very easy to repair a leather jacket if it rips. Kind of hard to repair, the rubber and whatnot, unless you have like the different professional like repair things. You can use some tent repair stuff to repair a lot of rain gear in a pinch, and sometimes just contact cement and stuff like that, and other pieces of rubber. But for the most part, it's just better to wear a leather jacket, and so that's why we've always opted for that, and that's why that is something that we have always used. It's something that a lot of bush people use is leather. And another argument for the leather, I dare you to go try to hunt in rain gear. Good luck taking your rain gear and going and finding a deer because it's noisy. It's very, very noisy. You can't take a windbreaker and you can't take rain gear on a hunt, not if you anticipate to ever see anything. Which actually brings me to another reality of reality television, which is try hunting with a film crew. Try hunting with a film crew. So, of course, they wanted to film us hunting. It was a major part of our life. I still go hunting every chance that I get. And in that life, it was a daily occurrence practically. It was a major part of our life was hunting, as much as any other creature that exists in the forest, right? So, obviously, that was something that they wanted to document and be part of and to film. So, I'll never forget the first time that all these city slickers showed up to film a hunt, and they smell like cologne. They are wearing windbreakers and rain gear and those puffy jackets. So that right there is a no. You can't smell like cologne walking through the woods. And that does not mean that you have to not bathe and you need to smell all musty. No, you can bathe and you can clean up. And in fact, you want to, because you don't want to stink out there. Because if you do, if you got a bunch of BO coming off of you, you're not going to see anything either. Because they're going to smell that. Like deer are very, very hypersensitive to all this stuff because everything's hunting them. The best thing you can do is go down to the creek, take unscented soap, scrub up really good, get nice and clean, have your clothes clean, but again with like unscented soaps and things, and then go hunting. You don't want to wear rubber rain gear. You don't want to wear windbreakers and stuff like that. You want to wear things that don't make noise. Like wool is good, leather is good. And broken in leather as well. Leather's much better once you break it in. People, again, that just wear it for fashion, like you wear it like 3 or 4 times, it's not going to be broken in. You have to like wear the leather for it to break in and not make noise and be something that's comfortable and that you can go hunting in and all that. So immediately that was a no-go. We had to basically like train the people in how they needed to behave for us to be able to go hunting. Also, they showed up and they're like, okay, we're going to take 3 camera guys and we're going to take the sound guy and we're going to take the technician. And then, of course, our safety guy needs to come and then you're going to go hunting. And we're like, that's way too many people. That's not going to work. You can't go hunting with 10 people that don't know what they're doing following you around the woods. Because the first one that steps on a twig, no deer. I'm not going to see a deer that day. So initially it was just like, okay, well, here's what you do. The unscented soap and the cleaning up and the don't wear colognes and the don't wear, deodorants and don't show up wearing like windbreakers and puffy jackets and all this. You need to show up in wool and like get a sweater and, those kinds of things and show up. And so they're taking notes and everything, and they come back having checked off all these things we told them. And then it's like, okay, now at most we're going to take a camera guy and the safety dude and maybe the sound person, right? Better to just like strap us up with the mics that have the batteries, and you don't need like a sound technician to make sure they're recording. Just hit record and let's go hunting. And that's how we did successful hunts on the show. Primarily just because they did what we told them to do. They lined it out the way that we were like, this is how it needs to work. And then I don't know if everybody had this problem, but I had a problem with it. They kept talking, which is a real issue when you're hunting. You cannot speak. It's one of the main things my dad taught me about hunting is your voice is death in the woods. Your voice will make it where nothing is going to be around, because you have to remember when you're in an area like that, like I said, the deer are very hypersensitive to everything. So they're going to be hyper observant, hyper aware of smells and sounds and everything that's going on. And if a deer is familiar with humans, then they are very much going to avoid the sound of a human voice. If a deer is unfamiliar with humans, they are very much going to avoid the sound of your voice because it's going to freak them out. They're not going to know what it is, right? So it's going to be a very unusual, very jarring thing. And a deer won't come back to that area for a very long time. Like deer will stick to their routine, to their area. They're very much creatures of habit. But they will not return to a spot that they've been spooked for weeks. They may never return, but they might come back out of curiosity like a few weeks later. Very stupid or very brave deer will come back near immediately just to check it out and see what's going on. But vast majority, they're just going to be gone, and you're not going to see them again. So you can't talk. And that was a definite issue for me because they like the film people, they would just ask a question, or they would ask a question to each other, or they would say something under their breath or something like that. And it's like, hunt over. I guess we'll start again tomorrow, unless we're going to try and trek 45 miles away from where we are and hope that the sound didn't carry on the wind. So you got to be very like into what you're doing. And then that did help when you would get film people that were into it. When there were camera people that were like listening to everything you said, followed all the instructions, weren't talking constantly, actually wanted to get a deer, actually wanted to do the thing that you were doing, and weren't looking at it as a drudgery, right? Because there were a few times that they're like, okay, we're just going to stay out here until we get a deer, right? And I was like, yeah, that's the plan. So if you're coming with me, that's what you're signing up for. And that's how we did it. All right, guys, I guess I've been talking for a while now and going from one subject to another. I do appreciate y'all guys dropping in for the show. I've had a lot of fun doing the podcast so far, and it is something that I intend to continue doing because there's a lot of fun stuff and stories to tell of the past and things that have, transpired in our life, both with the television show and without, from way back and more recently and all those things. And I've got Bear lined up to do an episode with me soon. That's probably going to be like the next episode that airs is going to be with Bear. We'll see. No promises. But I do have an episode with Bear coming. And one of these days I'm going to get more than one microphone. And I don't know how much I've talked about why I wanted to do the podcast and what really brought this on. But one of the reasons, and a big reason that I wanted to do it, besides the fact that I just always thought it would be cool to be a radio DJ. Up next, we got some Led Zeppelin coming at you fresh off the vinyl. That kind of thing. One of the reasons is because, like, my dad really inspired it. Because my dad, he said a lot of times that he really wished he had recorded all the conversations he had with his dad. And that he wished that he had recorded the conversations he had with his sister and his mom, and that how badly he wished he could listen to some of those conversations over again, and how cool that would have been. And unfortunately, I'm in the same position of wishing that I had Dad on the podcast, wishing that I could have had my old man sitting here on the podcast telling stories and talking about things. And even though I had wanted to do this for a while, it was not something I ever got to do with Dad. And I will forever regret that and wish that I could. Dad's the person I would want to interview the most on the podcast. I'm very grateful that I've gotten to sit down with my mom a bunch. and do a bunch of episodes with Mom. I think that's really cool. And I think it's awesome that in the future, like the future Browns will get to look back on the podcast and hear my mom telling stories and hear my brothers and I talking about things and having conversations and telling stories and all this stuff. I think that's really cool. And it's like another aspect, another, reality of reality TV is the fact that all the future Browns will get to know my dad. They will get to know our family. They will get to know our world. And they will get to be a part of our life back then and a part of Alaskan Bush People, the same way that y'all guys have been able to be. And I think that that's really cool. I think it's something that has definitely made all of it worthwhile, and something that my dad always said about the show. And it's another thing that I look at with the podcast is if it brings a smile to one person's face, if it makes one person's day a little bit easier, a little bit brighter, if it makes just one person forget about their troubles, even for a moment, then it was all worth it. It was all worth it. And I agree with that. I think that was a great way and is a great way to look at things like this and to look at that life of being in front of the curtain and putting your life out there like that. Because whether you're a movie star, whether you're internet influencer, whatever it is that you do in front of the curtain, in the public eye, under the spotlight, if you bring a little bit of joy to somebody's life, if you make somebody's day a little bit brighter, even for a moment, it's worth it. It's worth it. Something that I am often asked is whether it was weird to be filmed and to be on camera and to have a television show made out of my life and my family's life. I get asked a lot of questions about what it's like to be on TV, what it's like to film the show, what it's like to be part of a reality television production. But that is one of the main questions I always get is, was it weird? Now, obviously, it's not a normal thing to have people follow you around with cameras and want to document everything that you're doing, and for you to periodically get stopped to do little in-the-moment interviews and explain what it is that you're doing, and then to later do actual sit-down interviews with bright lights and cameras and people with clipboards and questions. So obviously that's not an everyday thing. So is it a little bit unusual? The obvious answer to that is yes. Now, for me, one of the strangest, one of the weirdest parts of it is just how used to it you get and how quickly you get used to it. At least for me, I found it to be something that I adjusted to really fast. Now, I know a lot of people have issues with being on camera in general. A lot of people have problems with having that much attention on them. A lot of people get very, self-conscious. A lot of people worry about how they're going to come across or what they're going to look like or how's my hair today. And those are not things that I have ever worried about. Those are not things that I have ever been concerned with. I don't so much really care at all what anybody thinks about me or how I come across or anything else. Now, obviously, as I've said before, nothing will make you do a little bit of self-reflecting like seeing yourself lose your temper on television, knowing it's being broadcast to millions of people and that it will be perpetually broadcast to millions of people for a very, very, very long time, potentially forever, or at least as close to forever as things can last. Because we've never been off TV since we started. Like, the show's been going nonstop since it first aired and shows no real signs of slowing down, because we're actually now on a whole bunch more streaming services than we were ever on in the past. So that does make you do, and has made me do, a little bit of self-reflecting, seeing myself lose my temper in that way, because it gives you a different viewpoint than you normally have of those things. And you definitely stop and have to say to yourself, I probably could have handled that a little bit better. Now, I do have to also say, though, that I think at least the majority of the time, I was right. And I definitely had a reason to respond the way that I did. Still could have probably done it better. I still could have probably been a better leader, a better quarterback, if I was able to keep my cool a little bit more in those situations. But that all being said, I never had the issue of worrying about, what I looked like or how I came across or anything like that. So for me, that not being a factor, I got used to the cameras rather quickly. And the strangeness of there being people around was a little bit of an adjustment because of us not being used to there being people there, and especially not the amount of people that there were. And it was definitely an oddity for us. But I got used to the being on camera part. So it didn't bother me with that. And I actually adjusted rather quickly. And the oddity of there being so many people there and there being so many people from so many different walks of life as well was interesting. It was something that was kind of cool because we would talk to the crew, we would talk to the production team, we would talk to the camera people and the producers, and we would talk to the sound guy, and they would tell us all these stories of all the places they had been and where they came from and what life is like for them. And these were people that came from all different places and walks of life. And so it was interesting to hear about their world and their experiences and all the different things that go into that lifestyle of going around and documenting other people's lifestyles. So it was very interesting. I know one of the things that drove me a little crazy about filming the show during production is the fact that they had to take a lunch break. Now, that might not sound like something that should bother me or would bother most people, but it definitely bothered me. For one, I'm not somebody that needs to eat a lot. I've typically my whole life, I've eaten basically one meal a day. Unless I'm trying to bulk up, I'm trying to gain weight, I'm trying to build my physique out a bit. In those instances, I will try to force myself to eat more during the day to get more protein in. But if the majority of my life and my default setting is to just eat once a day, is to eat one time a day, I eat supper, and that's it. And when you're working and you're out in the bush and you're doing these things, you only have so much light and you got to get things done and a lot of stuff is depending on you, then you don't want to have to stop or slow down. And growing up doing a lot of fishing and working on fishing boats is another reason why I'm not used to slowing down or stopping to eat, because when you're working on a boat like that, when you're doing those things, it's very labor intensive and you have to do what you're doing in the moment. There's no time to say, well, hold on, let me finish my sandwich. No, you got to do what needs to be done when it needs to be done. It's not flexible. So I'm very used to that kind of mode of thinking and moving through the world in that way and doing the work. So it always drove me a little bit crazy when we would be in the middle of doing something. It's an intense thing. It's a crazy thing we're doing. We got to get it done before the sun goes down or whatever's going on. And we would have to stop because the camera people and everybody needed to take lunch. Because you got to keep in mind, these people have unions and stuff, and there are rules and regulations and whatnot, and they can only work so many hours without having a lunch break and all this stuff. So we'd be in the middle of doing something crazy, and they will have lost track of time, I guess, and not realize they didn't know how long this was going to take, of course, and they're just filming us living our life. So a lot of times they had to just run and gun with it. And then all of a sudden, the person that keeps them all on track will come in and be like, everybody's going to take lunch. Everybody stop now. Everybody stop and eat. Because if not, they got they get charged overtime and all kinds of stuff. And I don't know exactly how all that works, but it's a no-no in the industry. So they got to stop down and have their lunch. And so we can't continue doing the thing that we were doing, right? Because they can't just stop filming, eat lunch, us continue doing everything we were doing, them come back and it looks completely different and we're finished doing what we're doing. Because if they didn't film it, it didn't happen, right? If you don't get to see it on TV, how would that work, right? We do half of the thing and then it just comes back from commercial and we're finished. So we would have to stop because they'd be like, if y'all don't mind, could you please not finish hauling all of those boards up the beach until we get back? Could you not build that wall on the cabin until we return with the cameras? We got to go eat some sandwiches. And of course, Dad didn't care. Most of the guys didn't mind. I'm over there like, how dare you need lunch? So it drove me crazy. And it didn't just happen the once. It would happen every now and then. It would definitely be a thing. So I was not the biggest fan of that. I've never been a big fan of somebody stopping to eat lunch. That actually reminds me of a job I once worked. It was a regular job, and I was doing this. It was construction. So I was working on this little construction crew, and part of what we were doing, like usually I ended up with the jobs that not fun, basically just haul stuff from one place to another or dig this ditch or those kinds of things. And so part of the job was unloading these trucks full of bags of concrete. That was basically the job. Unload the trucks full of bags of concrete, haul them over here and stack them. And it was myself and like 4 other guys. The 4 other guys would stop and take lunch. They would stop and take breaks every now and then. They would stop and take lunch, and I never stopped. I didn't want to stop. I've always been a guy that preferred jobs that when I show up, I do the job. When I'm done with the job, I can leave. Now, this was a paid by the hour or by the day job, so I wasn't getting paid for how much work I did, but I was also raised to have work ethic and to do the job and to have pride in the job. And I also don't get tired very easily, and I don't eat lunch. So when I was told unload the trucks full of concrete, I was like, okay, I'll unload the trucks full of concrete. And I just did that until I was done, until they were completely emptied, even when the other people would go on lunch or take a break. And I actually ended up getting fired from that job because I wouldn't stop, because I wouldn't slow down. It made everybody else look like they weren't working as hard as they could. And so the person that ran the little crew I was on actually fired me because I wouldn't take breaks and I wouldn't slow down. I wouldn't stop because it made his crew look bad to the people above him. So I got canned for being too hard of a worker, which is an interesting reason to get fired off of a job. But when it comes to the show, since we were just running around doing what we do and they were just filming us doing what we do, it was really easy to get into the mode of this is just the way life is now. This is just how we operate. There are going to be these people. There are going to be cameras. We're going to be filmed doing the thing that we're doing. And I know Bear loved it. Bear was constantly like, film this. You want to see me do this? Watch me do this. Watch me run over here. I did this cool thing. Did you get that? Was that on camera? Was it in focus? That was very much how Bear was the whole time. And he loved it. Always has, still does. Bear is a bit of a cartoon character. And people always ask, is that really how Bear was? Is that really how Bear is? Is that how Bear moves through the world? And the answer to that is very much yes. That is Bear. In fact, like I tell everybody, that's actually Bear toning it down. Because when you see Bear on TV, when you see Bear doing all these crazy wild things and running here and there and going a billion miles an hour all the time, that is actually Bear attempting to act a little bit normal. That is Bear calming it down. That's Bear trying to downshift and not come across too crazy. So picture that for a minute. The Bear is a guy who is always going a billion miles an hour. A billion miles an hour all the time. Extreme amounts of energy, never slows down. And that was actually him toning it down a little bit for the cameras. There were multiple times I remember when he had to slow way down for what he was doing so that the cameras and everybody could actually keep up with him. And it actually became a challenge for some of the camera people to be assigned to Bear, because there would be instances where there would be certain teams, certain individuals, certain camera people and everything that were assigned to different ones of us, different people, different siblings to follow us around to what we were doing. So like if Gaby and I were doing these things, hauling wood or building this thing or doing construction, and Bear was off doing a hunt, or Bear was, climbing a tree or trying to make a zip line or doing things like that, then there was a team of people that would go with Bear. So it would be split off into the teams because we were always doing a lot of different things. There were a lot of us to cover. We were all over the place. And like I said, a lot of the things we were doing, there's only so much time in the day. There's only so much sunlight. The tide's coming up and going out. And so we have to fight against all that stuff to get things done and to do what we needed to do. So we couldn't, stopping for people to do lunch was one thing when it was a big thing we were doing and everybody was trying to cover it and we were all working really hard. But when we had multiple different projects we were working on, multiple different things we were spread off doing, we couldn't wait on each thing for camera people to be ready to film that. So they'd have different crews of people go with different ones of us. And they, I guess, would try to compete with who could do which thing, who could follow which one of us, who could keep up with Bear. I know that definitely became a thing because there were multiple times we'd end up on the boat with the crew, and they'd all be talking during lunch or in between, changing batteries on cameras and all this. And we would hear them talking about, well, I was able to keep up with Bear and I didn't trip over the log and, things like this. And then there were other people yeah, I just couldn't keep up with him. So it was very interesting to hear that kind of stuff. But knowing Bear his whole life, him just being a wild animal like that, I'm not surprised at all. I mean, for us, not a big surprise. And to talk a little bit more about Bear, something that my dad actually wrote about in his autobiography, and something that Bear has talked about here and there a little bit, and I'm not sure to what extent on the show, but when Bear was a really little guy, I think he was 5 years old, he actually broke his leg really high up towards where his hip is, and he shattered it. He broke it really badly, and it was really intense. He was only 5 years old, I think 5.5, 6, somewhere in there. And he had to be put into a full body cast. So he was in a cast from the tip of his toes all the way up to his chest. And he was in that cast for a very long time. And I remember he was told that he might walk with a limp the rest of his life, that it might not, heal to where he would be as athletic as a normal person, and that it might slow him down. Obviously, that wasn't the case. If anything, it might have sped him up. And I remember when he got out of that cast. Now, I remember when he was in the cast, sitting with him and stuff, and playing video games with him and whatnot, and just spending time together because when everybody was out playing and we were all working and doing all these things, he was just laying there for a very long time. So a lot of us we would take turns, always spending time with him. And of course, everybody ended up waiting on him hand and foot, more or less, just because everybody felt bad about the little guy going through that kind of thing. And we're just glad that he was okay. But I remember when he first got the cast removed. I remember when he first was able to start moving around again. He was on crutches. And it was a slow go. And it was kind of hard to watch. He was like a wounded deer trying to, hobble around. And at first it was not something that he would he hit the ground running, but you could see how much it was weighing on him and how much it was affecting him, basically having to learn how to walk over again and how to make it work and how to function again. And at first it was a slow go, but then he seemed to heal really quickly and he seemed to get the hang of it. And I remember when he went from hobbling around just on with both crutches to kind of using just one crutch. And I can remember doing the cowboy thing of having him his arm thrown over my shoulder and me walking him around so that he could get his legs moving again and actually walk without the hobble of the crutches. So I would do that with him a lot. And then he got to where since his other leg was strong, he got to where he would hop a lot. Like he could just that was something he started doing almost right away because he didn't need the crutches if he was hopping. So he would hop around like Tigger all over the place, bouncing on one leg. And that definitely built up his ability to balance. It's one of the reasons he's very good at balancing on things. And then it just went really quickly to him not needing the crutches anymore. And from that point forwards, from like the day that he hung up the crutches, he started running and he never stopped. He never quit running. He just ran everywhere. And I remember him talking to Dad when he was at the point of relearning to walk again before he hung up the crutches. And I remember him talking to Dad, asking about if he would be able to run again, and is he going to be okay, and is he going to be slower than everybody. And I remember Dad just telling him that, that if you have the will to do it, then you'll be able to. If you are strong enough to adjust to whatever difference there is and push through it, then you'll be okay. And that he had full faith that Bear was going to be fine and be just as athletic as anybody. And I remember the look on Bear's face when they had that conversation. I will never forget that look because he had this not like super happy smile. He had this like mischievous grin on his face. Like the world can't stop me. I'm going to show everyone. And he really did. Because from the day he hung up the crutches, he never stopped running. He never stopped running. From that day forwards, he never quit running. He ran everywhere. He was super fast. He never let it slow him down. And a lot of people, a lot of times when you get hurt like that, you get this I'm made of glass thing going on. You get this feeling like, I'm going to get hurt again. Something bad's going to happen because, we move through life like we can't be broken. And then when you realize that you can be hurt in that way, it can have that effect on you, especially when you're really little, especially when you're a kid and stuff like that happens. It can traumatize you in that way and have that I'm made of glass effect. But it did not do that to Bear at all. It didn't slow him down at all, and he was totally fearless, completely fearless. So, needless to say, him being on the show, doing what he does, running around, flipping off at things, being that guy, was not put on at all. That's how he is. That's how he always is. And like I said, if anything, he was toning it down and he was slowing down so that the cameras and everybody could keep up with him. Now, Gaby, with the show, he partly was a little bit apprehensive about the cameras, a little bit shy, actually, because Gaby's not somebody that is incredibly self-aware, I think might be a good way to put it, because he's not somebody that is crazy into how he comes across or how people might perceive him. But he is someone that definitely cares about his appearance. He is someone that has put a great deal of effort into, keeping his hair fixed. He's that kind of guy. When he was a little dude, when he was a teenager, when he was 14, 15, he carried around a pocket mirror and a comb. So we would be on the back deck of the boat, or we'd be in the middle of nowhere. And, I'm running around with long hair and feathers tied in my hair and all this stuff. And Gaby, he's carrying around the little dabble-do-ya, the Brill cream and a comb and a pocket mirror like he's off of Grease. And he would stop on the back deck and whip out his little pocket mirror, whip out his comb, put a little dab on the hair and just be over there combing it back and forth over and over and over. And I can remember him just doing that all the time because he was definitely someone that was very into his hair and his appearance and the way that he is. Now, Bear also very much loves his hair, his long locks, as he calls them, and he would actually do the Marsha brush it 100 times before he goes to sleep kind of stuff. But Gaby loved to make sure everything was in place. So Bear, he just wanted it to be clean. He wanted it to be brushed. He wanted it to have that, that Prince Charming from Shrek kind of vibe. Where Gaby but Bear, once he was running around, didn't care really what it looked like or what was happening. He just wanted it cleaned and brushed and fixed. Gaby wanted every hair in place. Gaby didn't want a single follicle out of place. So he would stop even when like we really needed to work and we really needed to keep going and we needed to do what we were doing. And he would set down his end of the giant heavy beam so that he could fix his hair real quick. And that's before being on camera. That's before being on television and knowing he's being followed around with cameras. So now picture once he is being followed around with cameras. So he definitely had that kind of vibe with the camera stuff. Not so much, like I said, not so much that he cared how he was perceived or what people thought about him, but he's particular about his look, very particular about his look. And it might not always come across that way because Gaby does usually have, like, he's usually doing something where he's rolling around in the mud or he's covered in dirt or he's got stuff caked on his face. And that's just because he's rough and tumble. Like, he gets in there, he gets down and dirty, he does what needs to be done, and he doesn't at all think about the repercussions of those kinds of things. And he's a little bit of a klutz. But when it comes to like his hair and stuff, he always wants it to be perfect. And Gaby is somebody that has gone through great lengths to clean up, to make sure his face was clean, to take care of himself in that way. Kid always smelled like cologne and stuff, shampoo and cologne. He and Bear both, right? Because Bear with the shampoo loves his shampoo. I've gone through. It could be a whole nother podcast what I've gone through to get that kid his shampoo, because I was always the guy that did the running for everything the family needed. I was the guy that got the supplies. Like, it used to be Dad when we were little, but as soon as I got like old enough to be the guy to do it, I always wanted to be the guy. I was always vying for that job, but I was always the dude that did that, and people would give me like a little list of what they wanted me to bring back from town. And Barrett was always the shampoo. Horse mane and tail was his big thing. And I went through a lot multiple times to make sure that I got that and brought it back, because everybody had like their special little thing. And so I would go through a lot to make sure that I brought that back for them. But back on Gaby, another thing he's always been big on is like the shoes. He's a bit of a leprechaun when it comes to the shoes, keeping the shoes clean, polishing the boots. And you wouldn't think it. You wouldn't necessarily think that about him because he's always dirty, right? Because he's always doing what he's doing and he's always getting down there in the mud. But he was also the guy that was always stopping and polishing his shoes and making sure he had good, pristine, nice shoelaces and things like that. So we all have our eccentricities and our little quirks in that way. And like Noah, of course, never wanting to watch the show. Noah may have been the most affected by being on television, even though he sought to be the least affected by being on television. So like Noah tried to avoid ever being exposed to anything that had to do with the show or what the show might personify or what the show might show about him or how he moves through the world, or even just seeing himself do what he's doing and then have to self-reflect on that, and that might change his opinion on himself and all these different things. Where most of us, I'd say the majority of us, maybe all of us, didn't have that. We didn't really have that effect that we had to worry about. We didn't have to worry about changing the way we thought about ourselves because we saw us on TV. Maybe we're all just a little bit more egocentric in that way of thinking, I'm just fine. I don't need to change. I mean, we all try to be better people. We've always lived by the thing of be better tomorrow than you were today. That's something that, our parents very much instilled in us. But also, we're just mostly not affectable by the idea of what others might think of us. And we don't really look at things like when we're in it or seeing ourselves on TV or in the show and find different things to nitpick about ways that it bothers us. So we never really were affected by seeing the show. Where Noah, having his whole, I won't watch the show, I will never see the show, I don't want to see it or have anything to do with it. This kid actually goes as far as to like not watch, like he'll never watch the podcast. He's never going to see the television show. He's never going to watch Alaskan Bush People. He's not going to look at people's social media or things online. he will barely edit his own videos. Like, I don't even know if he looks at family photos. Like, I know he's got pictures of his kids and stuff hanging on his wall, but I think that's as far as it goes with Noah. And I think because of that mindset, it inadvertently actually made him more affected by being on TV than any of us, because of his dead set, I don't want to see it, won't watch myself, don't want to be affected by it. I think that in itself affected him, if that makes sense, if you understand what I'm saying here, because it changed his perception of how he perceives seeing himself and what that might do and how that might change his perception of self. And so it created a massive avoidance for anything that he participates in. But as far as like being on camera or being followed by cameras or having the camera crew around or anything like that, didn't bother Noah either. He wasn't really affected by that, and we all thought it was it had its cool element to it. Of this is kind of cool that we're doing this. It's kind of cool that we're doing a reality show about ourselves, and the fact that we were on a Discovery show was always kind of cool, because we grew up watching the Discovery documentaries. Right. We were those kids that grew up and I remember watching those Discovery documentaries on VHS tapes on the boats, and we'd watch them over and over, and you'd see, about the cheetahs on the Serengeti, and, you'd see about the rhinoceros and the elephants and all these things, and watch the documentaries about the penguins. And, you'd have all of the different documentaries like that, and it was always the Discovery Channel. And so it was really cool to sit there and think to yourself, well, wait a second, now I'm the cheetah. I'm the thing that is being documented by the Discovery Channel out in the forest. So that element to it was always really cool. That was always really cool, that idea. And then the thing as well, and I've said this before, is the element that it's very much like having extremely professional home movies is what it's like. So being able to go back and re-experience those things and see those things and live those moments over again is definitely something that is magical and something that I very much appreciate, and not something that I will ever take for granted. It's something that I think is really cool. And especially now, with things being different and everybody having grown up and everybody's got their own little wolf pack going, and we're all, more spread out than we've ever been. Still super close, but more spread out. And, with Dad having passed so long ago, and how life just changes, no matter what, life changes. And I think it's awesome that we have that time capsule of the show, and it allows all of us and all future generations of the Browns to look back, to know my dad, to get to experience those things, to get to be there with us in the bush at that time in our life. And I think that's super cool. I think it's something that the show really has afforded everybody, and something that I think people will appreciate more as the time goes on. It's something that I appreciated even at the time that we were there living it and doing it. But it's something that I definitely appreciate now. As hard and as melancholy as it is for me to sit down and watch the show or to hear my dad's voice, because seeing photos or even videos of Dad is one thing, but hearing his voice, it gets me in here. It definitely gets me to hear his voice. I walked into a place the other day. I walked into a little store, and the guy behind the counter was watching Alaskan Bush People, and I heard Dad's voice as I entered the store, and I will be honest with you, I almost fell over. I almost collapsed. I almost went to the ground, bawling my eyes out right there and then, because it was like walking into the room and Dad being there. I walked into the room, and unexpectedly, just out of the blue, I heard Dad's voice. I heard Dad talking about stuff. I heard that, that voice, and it got me in the feels real quickly, and that was hard. But I do think it's a massively positive thing the show exists. It's a massively positive thing that we got to do the show. It's a massively positive thing to have those experiences and to have gotten to do all the things that we did, and for it to be documented, and to have had that experience as a family, and to have done that with Dad and with my brothers, and to be able to have done those things, and to been the cheetah being documented, and to be on the Discovery Channel, and for it to be something that so many people have found enjoyment in. So many people have found enjoyment in watching, and so many people want to be honorary members of the Wolf Pack, and so many people live vicariously through what we were doing and what we do, and that they have come along with us on all these crazy misadventures. I think that is super awesome. It's very cool, and there's something uniquely special about that. Something very special about being a part of that and having that in our life. And so, in my opinion, it's been nothing but positives that have come from the show. It's been nothing but a fun ride and an enjoyable experience. And I count myself very fortunate to have had that as part of our life. And it's something that I think continues to be a positive aspect of our life and our existence. And like Dad always said, and I will continue to say, if the show brings a smile to one person's face, if it makes one person's day a little bit brighter, if it makes someone's hard existence a little bit easier, even for a moment, then it was all worth it. It was all worth it. Because it's all about that one person. It's all about that one kid that sees the show. It's all about that one old dude sitting there, in the hospital going through what he's going through, and getting a little bit of a boost from seeing, what we've gone through. And it's all about that family gathered around the television, watching the show and laughing and enjoying it. Because there are so many instances in our life where we'd start up the generator and we'd plug in a VHS tape, and we'd all gather around the beat up old TV, and we would watch an old documentary, or we would watch a movie, or we'd watch some television show that someone recorded off of a TV and had on a VHS tape that we traded for. And I've got a lot of really cool memories of that, and of doing that and having those moments with the family and with my dad. And it's super cool, and I feel very honored that our show is that memory for some people. I've had people tell me that. I've had people tell me that our show is the show that they used to watch with their grandpa, or that they used to watch with their dad, or that their family would all gather around for every new episode and eat popcorn and talk about what crazy thing the Browns are going to get up to this week. And so I think that's really cool. And I feel very honored to be part of the pantheon of people who get to be out there in that way and get to share their lives with people and share their experiences on this wonderful, amazing, crazy, beautiful planet we all share. So I think it's super cool. All right, y'all guys, have a good one. Stay safe, respect the danger, and I will see you next time for another episode of Brown Overboard.